Sound check July 7th, sound check July 7th, emergency and community services, sound check July 7th.
We're live now. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, councillors, staff. I'd like to call the meeting of the Emergency Community Services Committee to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. All electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can always submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions. Councillors, I will be timing your questions and not the answers from staff. Please note that quorum is present. Madam Clerk, can you advise, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have a few changes to the agenda. We have 3 additional delegation requests under item 6. Item 6.2C, Bill Johnston from the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, respecting an update on HATS and HATS research. That's for today's meeting. We also have item 6.2D from Paula Whitlow from the Hamilton Wentworth Chapter of Native Women Incorporated, respecting Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters for today's meeting. We also have item 6.3, Nancy Silva Khan from the New Democratic Party Federal Riding Association, respecting a motion to request the province of Ontario develop and implement a community warning program similar to the Amber Alert for today's meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Nan. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll call the question, please. The vote is up. Thank you, and that vote carries 3-0. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this afternoon? Seeing none, if any member of the committee ends up finding a conflict of interest during the meeting, please let us know, and then we can sort it out appropriately. Approval of the minutes for the previous meeting, June 16th. May I please have a move and a seconder to approve the minutes of the June 16th, 2022 meeting? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Nan. Any questions or concerns about the minutes? Seeing none, I call the question. The vote is up. And the vote carries 3-0. The delegation requests, there are a number of them. Shall I read them all out, Madam Clerk, or just go to the motion to approve the delegates?
As you wish, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we have 6.1, which is Hamilton is Home Projects. Graham Cubitt and Tricia Lewis. Hamilton is Home, respecting their upcoming projects for 2022 to 2024. 6.1B is Lorianne Gagne, Caledon Community Collaborative, respecting proposed affordable housing development at 60 Caledon Avenue. 6.2 is the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters Initiative. 6.2A would be Ed Fothergill, Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, respecting an update on the initiative. 6.2B is Tony Stortz. I think I pronounced that wrong. I could be correct. Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, respecting person with lived experience report. Bill Johnson, Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, respecting an update on HATS research. Paula Whitlow, Hamilton Wentworth Chapter Native Women Inc., respecting Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters. And then finally, we have 6.3, which is Nancy Silva Khan, the New Democratic Party for Federal Riding Association, respecting a motion to request the province implement a community warning program similar to Amber Alert. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the delegation requests as read out? Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I call the question, please. Thank you. Now that these items have been approved, the clerk staff will be uploading handouts and presentation slides for delegation items 9.1A, 9.1B, 9.12, 9.2A to 9.2C to the webpage for today's meeting. Consent items, so items number 7.1 through 7.3 are all information items, so we will vote on them all together after the discussion. Item 7.1 is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation CMHC Rapid Housing Initiative update. Is there any discussion on the report or any questions? Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you. Through you, on page 2 of the report, it just a note to staff. It lists the 219 East Avenue North Royal Oak carriage house conversion of 13 bachelor units as being in Ward 4. It's in Ward 3. Just wanted to make sure that that was captured accurately. It is a good news story. We are able to now say that 155 units will be online as of December 2022, this year, as a result of these RHI funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments about 7.1? Seeing none, I'll move on to 7.2, which is the Community Housing Renewal Implementation. Is there any discussion on this information report? Seeing none, I'll move on to 7.3, which is the Interview Subcommittee for the Emergency and Community Services Committee Minutes, April 5th, 2022. Is there any discussion on this particular item? Seeing none, may I please have a mover and seconder to receive consent items 7.1 to 7.3, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Nan, and I'll call the question. Thank you. That item is carried 3-0. We will now move on to our delegations. We will hear them and then receive them all together at the end. Our first delegation is 9.1A, Graham Cubitt and Tricia Lewis. Hamilton is home, respecting their upcoming projects beginning in 2022 and going to 2024. I understand that Graham is unable to attend today's meeting, and Sarah, how do I pronounce it, Board, is here instead, and I wish therefore to call upon Tricia and Sarah to come forward. Look at that, they're so fast. Are they speaking as a group, Madam Clerk, or as individuals? Thank you. Thank you. Please proceed. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of council, city staff, and members of the public. My name is Tricia Lewis. I'm the Director of Operations with Hamilton East Kiwanis Homes, and with me is Sarah Board, Manager of Capital Projects for the YWCA. No, I didn't. That one. No. No. Better. Okay. So together, we are here today representing Hamilton is Home, a coalition of 8 prominent nonprofit housing providers who work with over 11 allied organizations, as well as municipal staff, councillors, members of provincial and federal government to meet the housing needs of the most vulnerable in our community. Hamilton is Home was formed as a strategic response to the current housing crisis. We seek to transform lives through more safe, inclusive, accessible, and affordable housing units. As a coalition of nonprofit and charitable organizations, we have established a goal to create 3,000 new affordable units in the coming 3 years. I'm pleased to update you on the first phase, as we have 19 projects ready to commence construction between 2022 and 2024, with total project budgets of $664 million. creating 1,434 new units. Targeting rent at 80% of median market rent established by CMHC, plus rental targets established by ODSP addressing deep affordability. As you can see, we are committed to providing quality, affordable housing in perpetuity.
This pie chart highlights the total project cost breakdown of our 19 projects ready to start construction between 2022 and 2024. 90% of the cost is dedicated to design and construction, and the remaining 10% consists of the development charges, the Parkland Dedication Fees, the site plan approval, and building permit fees, as well as the education charges. Our coalition appreciates the continuous support received from the City of Hamilton. With the city as a co-founder, Hamilton is Home could leverage CMHC co-investment funding. Specifically, a contribution of $50.7 million, which equates to roughly $35,000 per unit, would allow the coalition to move forward and secure funding to build 1,434 new units. This contribution represents approximately 8% of the total project cost and is the equivalent of the development charges, the Parkland Dedication Fees, the site plan approval fees, and the building permit fees. Because of the recent interest rate and construction cost increase, our 19 projects are at risk. The housing crisis in Hamilton is getting worse. According to recent studies, Hamilton ranked within the top 5 of the least affordable city out of 25 North American cities. Our coalition provides social benefits beyond affordability and creates critical spectrum of housing for the most vulnerable population. We aim to house more than 3,000 people in the first wave of projects and prioritize women, Indigenous households, and Black Canadians. Our coalition projects align with the city priorities to reduce homelessness and reduce the waiting list for affordable housing. Additionally, our projects have ambitious environmental targets as well as accessibility features.
In conclusion, we require Council to support Hamilton is Home with a municipal investment equal to municipal fees and charges. This investment of approximately $35,000 per unit supports the first phase of our goal with the creation of 1,434 new units. These units will positively impact the housing crisis facing our community, and these units align with the housing targets identified in the Housing and Homelessness Plan. As your partners, we are committed to our mission and working with you on leveraging the maximum CMHC co-investment fund. This upfront commitment is critical to the viability of our projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, if you could lower the, so I can see the councillors. Thank you, Tricia and Sarah. Councillors, do you have any questions for the delegates? Councillor Jackson, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Clark, and nice to meet you virtually, Tricia Lewis. And is it Sarah Board? Did I pronounce that correctly too?
Yes.
Thank you. So can I get crystal clear here? Two things. Is your delegation today about a site-specific property, i.e. 60 Caledon? And after that question's answered, what is it specifically you're requesting ultimately of council? Is it waiving of fees, development charges, permit acceleration, other things? Chairman Clark, through you, please, so I can clearly understand the full picture of what this request is.
Please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Jackson, this Hamilton is Home represents the coalition, and we have a total of 19 projects. As a coalition, we meet every 2 weeks, working collaboratively, supporting each other, sharing resources, as well as keeping the pulse on this issue in our community. The common thread that keeps coming forward is the challenge we're facing with funding and matching those funds through co-investment through our federal partners. So the request, Councillor Jackson, is that we need municipal support. We've broken it down in terms of which is referred to the development charges, which we understand there's been an amendment and a change to the current bylaw, but we need that in some form of a grant or an investment on your behalf, and remind you again that that breaks down to a minimum of $35,000 per unit over 19 projects, impacting 1,434 units.
So to be crystal clear, Tricia, I'm sorry, did I interrupt or that was the end of your comments?
Yes.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Councillor.
Thanks, Chair Clark. So through you, Chair Clark, so development charges, 35,000 per unit, 1,400 units. That's obviously a whack of multi-millions of dollars potentially. You're looking for some form of then accommodation, waiving, reduction, grant, something to offset those costs either in its entirety or at least a portion of. I just want to be crystal clear. Through you, Chair Clark, again to Tricia.
Tricia, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to you, Councillor Jackson, it certainly would be on behalf of the coalition, we're certainly asking for the full support. As Sarah pointed out in the presentation, the pie chart delineates the true costs that the nonprofit and charitable organizations are carrying through this construction. And we carry the lion's share of that. And the risk. And we're in this, as we said, for the long haul and provide back to you with your investment in perpetuity, true affordable housing.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, okay. And by the way, kudos and applause all around for the Hamilton is Home initiative, your program, everything. I've been very much aware of it for a while, and huge congratulations from the Ward 6 office from what you're doing. So can I ask sincerely, Tricia, through you, Chair Clark, were you aware that there might be this financial challenge and accommodation from the municipality when you were working on federal funding from CMHC? Or has this kind of, if you will, sprung upon you as an obstacle that maybe Hamilton is Home wasn't maybe anticipating or possibly aware of? I just want to get the reality of why this suddenly obviously has become an issue. Through you, Chair Clark, and then that's my last question, but I will have some for staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Trish, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to Councillor Jackson, not ever an obstacle that Hamilton is Home looks at anything. We see everything as an opportunity, and the opportunity in front of us is the support from our federal level of government, putting together funds and resources available to address this issue. And that is how we want to be able to leverage the maximum amount of those dollars coming into Hamilton. When that happens, not only the creation of these units that are desperately needed, but it also brings jobs and other economic viability to our community. So these things can't be ignored, and we can't do it alone. We will not be able to meet that maximum without your commitment to and meeting us as an investor in that.
Okay, picture is getting clear as the more we're conversing. So thank you, Tricia and Chair Clark. That's it for me for now until staff hopefully has some further answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next councillor is Councillor Yan, please.
Thank you, Chair Clark. And similarly, I have some questions for the delegation, but also would like to be able to ask staff some questions as well. So thank you, first of all, Trish and Sarah, for being here this afternoon and for delegating, and congratulations for all the work that's been achieved through the coalition to date, of which I just wanted to confirm City Housing Hamilton is a member, right?
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, City Council is a member.
Thank you.
I was aware. I just wanted to put it on the table. So I wanted to clarify, if I could, through you, When you're saying that the 19 projects are at risk, it's tied to the CMHC funding and the requirements of that CMHC funding being that there is municipal contribution. Can you spell out again what are the requirements for the funding agreements that you have in place for these 19 projects, and why is it in jeopardy?
Trish, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to Councillor Nan. It's not only being able to meet the need of this opportunity to leverage those federal dollars, but like everything today, we are facing increasing interest rates, escalating construction costs that are only adding to the complexity of our projects. So trying to make sure our dollars are being matched and stretched to the best of their ability, it's important. But we truly cannot move forward without that match investment on behalf of the municipality. So,
Councillor?
Okay, and so to date, through you, Chair, has the city not matched the investments that are required in order to have these 19 projects move forward?
Go ahead, Trish.
through you, Mr. Chair, when we bring these projects forward, there will be the period where the individual projects have to address the fees related to development charges. And that's where we need the most assistance with right now in order, and CMHC is looking for that as an initial commitment in order to secure their funding. So I hope that helps too.
Yeah, I wanted to
Okay.
make it really clear, and that does clarify it. So it's the fees related to development charges, which in the past for affordable housing used to be exempt. The municipality changed our policy in 2019. At that time, council, from what I remember, council was informed that there would be an alternate policy that would be developed to ensure that we don't bring projects like these non-profit affordable housing projects so that they don't come into jeopardy. So through you, Chair, is that the crux of the issue here?
Trish, feel free.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is the heart of the issue.
Thank you. That's it. Those are my questions for the delegations. Thank you.
Thank you. We have an observer today, Councillor Danko. You have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate. Just a couple follow-up questions on the CMHC application process. Does the CMHC funding constitute the full funding for these projects, or is it a portion of the funding?
Trish?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it's a portion of the funding that the agencies are working towards.
So for a typical project, there would be multiple funding sources through whichever agency, nonprofit is advancing the project, and the CMHC would contribute, some percentage of the total funding for each individual project. So when you're applying to the CMHC, it's not funding 100%. It's some proportion.
Trish?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct, to my understanding, but and also to recognize that each agency is also contributing its own equity into these projects as well. So it's a layering approach of funding that is happening in order to meet these projects and get them to the start line and get them off the ground. It's complex, but when we have this, again, opportunity through our federal partners to bring these funds into our community to address the needs that are paramount, it's important that we, as Hamilton is Home, work with you, the City of Hamilton, in the best of our abilities to be able to maximize this opportunity.
Thank you, Trish. Councillor?
Thank you. And when you apply for that CMHC funding, as has been previously stated, you require a municipal contribution in order to qualify. And my understanding is previously that municipal contribution was an exemption from the DC funding. So it's not like it was a grant or levy dollars that were transferred. It was simply we weren't collecting the DC fee, which then qualified the application for a CMHC. Am I understanding that right?
Trish?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. Councillor Dinko.
Councillor Danko, please.
So just so I'm clear and the committee's clear, what you're asking for is not, additional funding or, a grant or levy funding or anything like that. It's simply an exemption. So we would simply not collect fees. And that would qualify.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to Councillor Danko, we need to find a way to meet this need. Right now, as the current bylaw reads, that exemption is not there, so we need to find a way to bring that forward to help our applications at CMHC.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions from the councillors? Okay, so we're going to move on to our second delegation, and then I'll entertain questions of staff at that particular point, and then we'll move on to our next delegation, which is on a different item, if that makes sense to the councillors present. Thank you. So our next delegation is Lori Ann Gagne, Caledon Community Collaborative, respecting the proposed affordable housing development at 60 Caledon Avenue. Lori Ann, please come forward. Councillors, we're just doing some technical stuff here. Hang in there. Is there a way to get that to the full? There we go. Ingenious. Look at that. You just looked at it and it happened.
Right, when you have the right supports behind you. So good afternoon, Mr. Chair, councillors, and staff, and the public that's here. Thank you for taking the time to hear me. 5 minutes. I'm going to build on the Hamilton is Home presentation. And to Councillor Jackson's question, we'll talk about a specific project within the Hamilton is Home targets. So I'd like to talk about Caledon Community Collaborative. What is it? Who are we? We are coming together, a collaboration between two long-standing nonprofit partners in this community, Victoria Park Community Homes. I'm the CEO of Victoria Park. I'm also president of CCC. And of course, Hamilton East Kiwanis, and you heard from Tricia a little bit earlier. So our two organizations have partnered together so that we could develop a larger site. Collectively, right now, our two organizations currently offer and deliver quality affordable housing to over 3,000 households in the Hamilton area. And we provided you with our dates of incorporation, only to show you we've been community partners for almost 50 years now, providing this affordable housing. We're here to stay, as Tricia said, in perpetuity. So a little bit about the Caledon Community Collaborative specifically. This is a big project. This is a $133 million investment into this community, which will create 266 affordable housing units and house approximately 664 people. There is a tax revenue currently built into our pro formas, so any DC waivers or any investment the municipality is making, you are getting back a return on investment from this project. Of course, there is job creation and using ONFA's document, we predict about 600 jobs. Most importantly, this particular development is also adding a 1.1 acre green space park for that community. We have redesigned that lot 3 different times to meet the community's needs, but it goes to show that we're community partners. We listened, and on Tuesday, our zoning bylaw amendment application came forward. There was 0 opposition because we've spent 2 years talking to the community about what they want in that neighborhood. And so a little bit more, I've already mentioned, all 266, all of them are affordable at the affordable rates right now, and that is almost 1 year of Hamilton's goal of 300 per year. There will be 70 accessible units, net zero carbon, LEED gold, so it's very environmentally friendly. and again, mentioning the in perpetuity. And because our nonprofits will manage this on the ongoing, we are very invested in building a quality product now because we're on the hook for future capital repairs and maintenance, of course. Total project costs, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular pie chart because I do want to spend some time on the next one. But this is how the $133 million is broken down: construction costs, development charges, et cetera, and you'll all have this presentation for your information. This is the one I would really like to focus on and actually speaks to a few of the questions from the previous presentation. This is the proposed project funding. And why I stress the word proposed is because in this scenario, the City of Hamilton is coming to the table with the waiver of development charges. And for our property, our Caledon Community Collaborative, that's to the tune of just over $8 million. You can see that even with this investment, so there were questions about co-investment fund having adequate co-investment from other levels of the municipality, because I do want to recognize you have waived some permit and application fees. There is a Parkland Dedication Fee, and there is a vendor take-back mortgage on this particular property that are all contributions, but they're too small. It's only with the development charges that it becomes an adequate co-investment. Only last week, so there was talk about risk. I will tell you here and today, this 266 units is at risk. Only last week, CMHC wanted to pull our application because the funding is not secured. We convinced them to change the status to more information required because we told them about this meeting coming up. So we have that status, but they want to pull our application, which is the bigger message to council. If we don't find the fix for that bylaw change that Councillor Nan mentioned, all of these projects are stalled, and we're going to face our challenges with CMHC. I hear my time up, so I'll move very, very quickly. Just to say, our ask. I'm here to say, my hand is out, sorry, my hand is out. We need those development charges waived to the tune of just over $8 million. We submitted our CMHC application thinking that this was sort of a fait accompli before we realized the interpretation, the wording of the current bylaw. Let's not risk this investment in the community.
Can you advise
Thank you.
the timelines that you are now under? How much time has CHMC given you to resolve this issue?
They have not given us a deadline, Mr. Chair. Like I said, only as of last week. What we did talk them into is meeting with us every 2 weeks so that we can provide them an update on the information. So our next meeting with them is in 2 weeks to advise on the progress we're making. Every day, as Tricia alluded to earlier, with the increases in interest rates and construction costs, that pie chart that I showed you, you realize that 75% of that $133 million falls on the nonprofit. By way of cash equity, our two organizations are putting in $44 million cash. For a nonprofit, that's a lot of money. The rest we are debt financing, and then the federal and the municipal contributions are a very small piece of that pie. We can't take on more debt load without it. CMHC won't even let us. They're saying it's not viable. So I hope that after 2.5 years on this project, we don't lose it.
Thank you, Lori-Ann. Madam Clerk, if you could remove the presentation so I can see the faces of the councillors. Councillors, you've heard the delegate. Do you have any questions or comments? Councillor Jackson, please.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. And Lori-Ann Gagne, let's see, how's my memory? Are you during the time of former executive call engage, or are you post-call engage?
Oh, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. I haven't heard you're the former call in a while since I've been at Victoria Park.
All right,
yes,
okay.
Sir. I have been in the housing industry 40 years.
Wow,
And
okay.
so it's been a long time, and I can tell you there's nothing like development now. It is so complicated, and it is so hard, and it will literally break my heart if the City of Hamilton doesn't come up with a solution and we lose the federal investment that's on the table now. It won't be on the table forever.
Okay, so thank you, Lorianne. Yeah, thanks, Chairman Clark. I just remember all the years working closely at Victoria Park Homes with the esteemed Colin Gage. Lorianne, thanks for what you're doing. So to be crystal clear, Council ultimately waives, accommodates the 8.3 million. It salvages your project and allows it to move forward. Through you, Chairman Clark, correct?
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair, yes, that is the current state. We are also pushing CMHC to lock in early because I mentioned those interest rates. On a project of this size and this value, a half a basis point increase to the interest rates is $20 million to us. Because we are at maximum co-investment loan with CMHC, any additional costs at this point come from the nonprofit's equity.
Councillor?
Right. So again, to focus on targeting the municipality, you need us to deal with the 8.3, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Again, Lorianne, just to be crystal clear, when you applied for this loan mortgage with CMHC, I guess it was with the stipulation, your anticipation, understanding the 8.3 million you applied to the city would not be an issue. And as you've gotten closer to project construction starting, this is when you've realized something changed. Just so that the public understands why this is suddenly in front of us. Through you, Chairman Clark.
Ms. Gagne?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Councillor Jackson, that is correct. When we submitted our application to CMHC, we thought this would be included under previous applications of the bylaw. As Tricia explained, that change, and Councillor Nan alluded to, that change in 2019 in the current interpretation is that if you apply for co-investment, because DC charges are an eligible expense, you are therefore disqualified from an exemption under the municipality. You are disqualifying all of us from applying for co-investment under that clause.
Councillor
Perfect.
Jackson?
Yep. Thank you, Lorianne. And again, Chair Clark, I'm hoping finance staff and housing staff are going to be available after the delegations. Thank you, Chairman Clark.
Housing staff will be here. I'm not sure if finance staff. Do we have finance on the line? Okay, we do have them. The next, Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. First of all, thank you, Lorianne, for the delegation today. And also, I don't know about the rest of my colleagues, but that first slide on your table, your title page slide, and following this project closely, just want to say again, thank you for doing things right. Thank you for being in constant community consultation and for bringing forward a final site plan design that is something that everybody in Hamilton should be proud of in terms of the design and also the way in which you've accommodated community interest of your neighbors as well. It is a testament to not-for-profit community-based housing across the city and leveraging your, I think, collective hundreds of years of experience, leveraging your assets and building real homes and communities for our residents here in Hamilton. So can't stress enough how much I appreciate the work that everybody does in your organizations across the table. So 2 clarifying questions, please, if I could. Through you, Chair, was the city formally aware of your project prior to your application to CMHC?
Ms. Gagne?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, they were. In fact, we purchased the land from the city through the conditional sales offering, and we've been in discussions with the city. I don't know that they actually saw our CMHC application, but we have been in discussions with them all along.
Thank you. And last question would be through you. Was the city formally aware of your project prior to our DC policy changing in 2019?
Ms. Gagne?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, not at that time. We purchased the land from the city in 2020.
Thank you.
Councillor? Anything further?
Nope.
Thank you. Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just so committee's aware, if you're not on planning committee, this project was just approved yesterday for zoning approval and would be heading to site plan. And I know Lorianne and her team is anxious to actually get underway construction as soon as possible. If I could just dig down a little bit on the funding contribution. So you had the pie chart there of the various contributors. So first I want to focus on the city contribution. So there's $5.1 million vendor take-back mortgage. What does that mean? What is a vendor take-back mortgage?
Go ahead, Ms. Gagne.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Glad you asked, Councillor, because it wasn't a cash outlay. Vendor take-back mortgage. It was the increase in value of the land from the time you purchased it to when you sold it to us. So I understand the city purchased it from school board or whatnot for $5 million. The conditional sales offering went out, and we paid cash $5 million so that the city wasn't out of pocket. But at that time, the appraisal then came in saying the land was worth just over $10 million. So the additional equity in the land, the city put forward as a contribution and is being counted by CMHC as a vendor take-back mortgage.
Councillor Danko.
Thank you. And that vendor take-back mortgage, are you paying that to the city? That 5.1 million?
Ms. Gagne.
No, Councillor. It's
That was
conditional.
forgiven.
It's like a forgivable loan as long as we meet our conditions of affordability.
Thank you. However, I think it's just important to note that $5.1 million as a forgivable loan is really a loan on paper, because the city wasn't actually out $5.1 million. It was just the change in value between the transactions.
That is correct. That is correct.
Councillor.
Thank you. The other contribution then is the $2.1 million Parkland Dedication Fee, or in lieu of Parkland, cash in lieu, I think it is. Just so I'm clear, that is, an official exemption in the Parkland Dedication bylaw.
Yes, Councillor, and that one gets a little bit more complicated because the conditional sales offering said we would have to pay Parkland dedication fees because no park was needed. After consulting with the community, they wanted green space because they're very used to that school there. So as I mentioned previously, we altered our plans 3 times to accommodate the community. And then we went back to the city saying, I know when we bought the land, we agreed to pay Parkland dedication fees. However, we're now giving you a 1.1 acre park that we are going to maintain not on the tax base, and we opened it up to the community in perpetuity. So we basically said you can't have your cake and eat it too. Please waive the parkland fees, which you did.
I think also important for committee to know that the purchase agreement that required payment of Parkland dedication fees only required 10% affordable housing. So it could have been 90% market, 10% affordable, which is why it didn't qualify under the bylaw for an exemption from Parkland dedication fee. So, Lori-Ann, you're providing, just to remind us, 100% affordable units.
Ms. Gagne.
That is correct, Councillor. 100% of those 266 units are in the affordable range and range from the 80 or 85% of AMR up to 125%, but all deemed affordable.
Thank you. In the pie chart, you had the CMHC funding. I think it was 15%. Am I remembering that right?
Ms. Gagne.
The federal provincial portion.
That's correct.
And is that?
15%.
Sorry.
Yes, it is 15%.
Okay.
20.3 million.
Okay. And is that a grant? Or do you have to pay that back?
That is the grant portion from the federal government. That is the portion we don't have to pay back. And then in the loan through CMHC, we'll carry the other portion, the debt portion.
Okay.
Councillor.
Is that the 15%? Is that what is at risk if the development charges are not exempted? Or is there additional to that?
Ms. Gagne.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to be completely honest, no, the entire project is at risk just because we've reached our max. Our board of directors, and again, I only know how to put cards on the table and be completely honest. I mean, our board of directors is looking at this and saying, if the city of Hamilton won't come to the table with adequate co-investment, Victoria Park can take its 22 million and go develop in Brantford or Halton or another area where our dollar will stretch further, because this is a big investment for us. So it's leaving my board in a very, very precarious position right now.
Councillor?
Thank you. And my final question, and again, just so I'm clear and the public's clear, is you're not asking for, a taxpayer contribution of cash. You're asking, you received, an on paper city contribution of $5.1 million and an exemption, which doesn't actually put taxpayers out $8.3 million. It's simply not collected.
Ms. Gagne?
That is correct. In other words, we haven't asked for any direct cash transfer from the city. And we can be creative on how these development charges are waived. I'm not in the finance department, and I know you have staff, but you don't have to take the whole brunt in 1 year because of affordability requirements, just like the vendor take-back mortgage. It could be written off over a period of 10 years, provided we meet those affordability levels. And then that way they hit on the municipal budget is not $8 million in 1 year. It's a lesser portion over 10 years if that allows for proper planning. I just think there's a solution if we put our minds to it.
Councillor?
Thank you. Those are all the questions I have. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Nan, can you take the chair for a moment, please?
Certainly, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chair, can I ask our delegate, I didn't quite understand the statement 80% to 125% affordable. That just kind of confused me.
If you could.
Thank you, and I think it confuses a lot of us, including our internal tracking teams. But yes, there are ranges of affordability and the definitions from either CMHC or a local municipality and what measure we have to use. And so they do range, but that 30% that was in the conditional sales offering, that is the deepest level of affordability that we're going. That's the 80% of AMR. But then some of our units, the other percentage of the units, go up to 125% of the average market rent. There was an article in The Spectator yesterday that quoted the numbers. So our one bedrooms right now are renting on average in this new development for about $1,000. Whereas in the open market to go rent a same one bedroom, it's about $1,700.
Councillor?
And so, Chair, I'm an old dog. Can we use old language then? So in the old days, we would talk about SNITs, we would talk about mixed income,
Yes.
we would talk about residents who would be paying virtually nothing because they didn't have any income except for government income, to residents who could pay market rent. So is that still this type of project, but you're using different language?
Right. No, this one is a little different.
Okay.
Because you're right down to the deepest level of need where they're on only government assistance. That is not the target for this project at this time.
Okay.
This is, to use old terms, and I don't necessarily like the old terms, but it's to house the working poor.
Okay.
So again, when we presented earlier to the planning committee, we were saying that on average you would need an income of about 55 up to 70,000 to meet those affordable market rents that we're proposing.
That explains a great deal to me. Thank you very much. Any further questions for Ms. Gagne? You did very well. Thank you very much. You're welcome to take your seat, please.
Thank you all.
Thank you. At this moment, we'd be opening the floor to questions to staff. I do wish to remind the committee members procedurally, council has already dealt with this issue. So there is a council decision with regards to how we deal with DCs. So normally we would kick this over to AF&A, and AF&A would make recommendations, and it would go to council, and then council would make the final decision. So we're in an awkward spot because I don't see a procedural way that we as a committee can address it, but it can be addressed at council on Friday. And so I just want to make sure that the councils understand if there is a desire to perhaps repeal the decision on DCs, That can be a motion that can be presented Friday. We would move a reconsideration motion first, and then if that was approved, then you would move into the motion that would deal with the issue. That being said, welcome to have questions of staff to clarify where we are and perhaps get some suggestions. The floor is open. Who wants to start? Councillor Jackson, please.
Chair Clark, first of all, always appreciate your leadership and direction on procedure and process. Thank you for outlining that, because I wasn't clear what our small committee today could actually do. So thank you for clarifying that for public consumption.
My pleasure.
But at least let's get the conversation started, regardless of where it might ultimately go. We've heard from delegates today that are on tender hooks about their projects potentially being uncertain because of municipal involvement, lack of involvement, once anticipated involvement, changed involvement, whatever. So through you to either Manager Fletcher, if he's here from housing, and or whoever's representing finance, let's at least get this conversation started as to the lay of the land and what options may be available tomorrow at council to at least reopen and rediscuss the importance of these housing projects that are hanging in the balance. So through you, Chair Clark, maybe either Manager Fletcher or whoever's here from finance could give us some reaction to what they've heard now. Please, through you.
Al, would you like to start? I know we have finance staff on the line, we have legal staff on the line, and Edward John is on the line somewhere too. Al, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Al Fletcher, Manager of Investment, Affordable Housing and Neighborhood Development. I think Angie is probably there, and I'm just wondering if she wanted to start or would just like me to go into this.
Oh, my apologies. I didn't realize the general manager was available. My humble apologies, Chair Clark.
The GM is here, and I'm looking right at her. She's smiling and kind of indicating Al can start.
No disrespect, General Manager Burden. My apologies. Didn't see you.
No problem. Al, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Clark. So just some clarification. First of all, we're very excited about working with Hamilton as Home, as well as other affordable housing providers that are out there and don't form part of Hamilton as Home. Our goal is to get them to shovel ready and assist wherever we can to get them financially viable and moving this forward. So that's our goals. So just to provide some clarification in regards to the development charge exemptions. So the DC bylaw that was the 2019 bylaw does waive DCs for affordable housing projects subject to two criteria. The first criteria is that they're receiving upper level funding, which most of them do. And then the B portion is the critical one in part of these discussions, which states that if a proponent is receiving upper level government funding where DCs are an eligible expense, then there is no exemption from our DC bylaw. So in the case of a rapid housing initiative funding, DCs are not an eligible expense, which means those projects that are funded solely through RHI, they would get a DC exemption. For those projects that are seeking co-investment, which a majority of them are because of the rising costs that the presenters have provided, costs beyond their control, they go to co-investment to seek additional funding. Co-investment does specifically permit DCs as an eligible expense. And that's where we run into the problem here in that council-approved bylaw would not exempt them from DC exemptions. So that is the issue there. The other thing to remember in this is that where DCs get exempted by the bylaw, the DC Act does require housing or the city to find the equal amount of money to put into the DC fund to pay for those DC fund projects. So just using the example, if council were to waive $2 million on a project, or it was exempted from the bylaw or exempted in payment as per the bylaw, housing and corporate finance would have to work to find that $2 million to then move into the DC fund to pay for those projects. So we can't we need to make sure all the money moves properly to fund those projects. So that's one issue. Just a clarification on the Parkland dedication for 60 Caledon. So 60 Caledon, everything that they said was correct. In the Parkland bylaw, housing has the ability to deem a project to be affordable housing. And by doing that, the bylaw permits us to exempt cash in lieu of parkland. So no special motion was required for that. And we were able to do the cash in lieu of parkland for that project.
Okay, Manager Fletcher, thank you. I know why you're smiling, because Jackson is driving much slower down the path of listening to you and trying to understand everything you said. So forgive me. This whole DC thing, you really and council maybe 3 years ago complicated things for me. So just bare tax. Caledon, for example, let's deal with it. It's public, 8.3 million. They're no longer eligible for that waiving because, fill in the blanks, please, through you, Chairman Clark.
Through the chair, by applying for and receiving CMHC co-investment funding that has DCs as an eligible expense, the exemption no longer applies.
So isn't that a double whammy hit on the project? The way, geez, Al, they've applied for it. By the way, I'm not shooting them. Don't ever take any of this, Manager Fletcher, as shooting the messenger with your responses. I'm just trying to understand. Holy mackerel! What a double whammy and an awful predicament that stipulation put them in. Through you, Chair Clark.
Yeah, through the chair, that was the decision of the 2019 of council for approving the 2019 development charges bylaw, and those are the requirements for the DC exemption that are in there. So that's where staff's hands get tied in the exemption process.
Okay, and
Counselor?
okay, anybody from finance? Yes, sorry, Chair Clark. Sorry.
No problem. We have Mr. Kovacevic on the line from legal, and he raised his hand.
Oh, Barrister Kovacevic. Okay, yes, sir.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just thought I would assist with that last question. The bylaw provides an exemption, a DC exemption, but in this case, it would not apply, as Mr. Fletcher indicated, because the exemption says if you're funding from another source, like CMHC, provides the ability to pay for DCs out of that funding, you're not part of the exemption. So the exemption is designed for providers that get funding but don't get funding that are eligible to pay DCs.
Oh, so Chairman Clark, we heard from the delegates, and we'll stay specific with Lorianne and 60 Caledon because it's site specific. So hypothetically, Lorianne and Victoria Park, they received an additional amount of money from CMHC that allowed them to pay the DCs? Is that what I'm hearing between the two staff, or am I misinterpreting, please? Through you, Chair Clark.
Mr. Kovacevic, would you like to
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not whether they received it, it's the funding they received. There's certain allowable expenditures from that funding. One of those allowable expenditures is the payment of development charges. Whether they were funding to pay for their capital costs or whatever, I'm not aware. But if the funding they receive, if one of the categories of expenditures and the funding that they receive from CMHC or any other source is that it can be used for DC payments, then they're not eligible for the exemption.
But then that takes away from their overall project if they have to pay the 8.3 million. Oh boy. Thank you, Barrister Kovacevic. Chairman Clark, listen, I'm already saying, yes?
Mr. Fletcher has his hand up.
Oh, manager, yes?
Through the chair, and just to clarify to add to what Mr. Kovacevic said, the money they are seeking makes this project viable. If they don't get the DC exemption, the $8.3 million, whether it's a DC exemption or a grant, the project is not viable. The other key in this, not just specific to this project, but to others, when you apply for co-investment, the city's contribution becomes the in co-investment. So if we are not making contributions as a city as part of that fund, that's where that funding could be in jeopardy because there's no or city investment into that funding to share the costs.
See, and this is where Manager Fletcher, Chair Clark, just let me know how my time's doing in terms of my speaking time, but this is where, yep, sorry.
1 minute.
Okay. This is where I'm perplexed that we've had 3 years since the 19 change of the bylaw. I'll explain right now. If I maybe didn't further understand the whole ramifications of that change on the not-for-profits, then I'll stand and say, you know what, I definitely have to at least have a rediscussion on the whole matter to explore potential opportunities. But so Manager Fletcher, I don't understand how, if we're the part of the co-investment, how we've reached this point today with these delegates that are saying, folks, without your further involvement, our projects are potentially dead and gone and moving to another municipality. Al, I guess, again, no condemnation of staff. I'm trying to understand how we got to this point instead of it over the last 2-3 years, all being resolved in advance. That's my last question, Chair Clark.
Mr. Fletcher, please.
Thank you, through the chair. The issue has been the need for co-investment right now. There's been so many different streams of funding in the past, and those streams of funding have not had necessarily DCs as an eligible expense. So we haven't had to really worry about this, as I understand it. So rapid housing or Ontario priority home housing initiatives or Canadian Ontario housing initiatives, those funding of social infrastructure funding, and I believe the investment in affordable housing and the extension, they all didn't have DCs as an eligible expense, so we never came across this problem. It's been since the need of co-investment has become the option for contribution, so non-loan but grant contribution money as being the way to compensate for the increased costs we've seen in land, materials, and trades. It's become the option or the go-to option to find the funding to try and make the projects viable. And that has been more recent.
Chair Clark, I'll conclude. Thank you, Manager Fletcher. You've educated me a lot in the last 10 minutes. Chair Clark, I'll conclude by saying so much of the sand has shifted. I think council owes it to itself to at least have one more conversation of what we did 3 years ago and the dilemma in front of our housing providers. Thank you, Chair Clark, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Nan, please, you're up next.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, to my colleague, it's taking me a long time to connect all these dots and be very clear as well. So I'm walking your pace, Councillor. So to staff, when Council approved the DC policy changes in 2019, it was my understanding that at that time, we were also going to be pursuing an alternate policy, and that was going to be coming back to committee and then eventually be available for council's ratification, specifically as it deals with affordable housing projects and to avoid this scenario. Am I misunderstanding that? Is there something coming down the pipe, or is that direction that staff have needed?
Mr. Fletcher, I'm opening the floor to anybody. Go ahead, Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. So there has been a program developed by staff, and sorry, what you have said is correct. There's a program that's been developed by staff, which I received a couple weeks ago to review. My understanding to date, there has not been a funding source to attach to that program to be able to fund this change. Now, in saying that, we've started discussions with corporate finance about having that discussion about how do we get there, because it's not just DCs, it's other funding that's needed as it relates to things like you may have noted in the RHI report that went earlier, the city is on the hook for any overages for projects beyond the CMHC funding. So we anticipate that with projects coming forward. There was the request from North Glanbrook for pre-development cost funding of $1.7 million that we are trying to figure out how do we assist in funding that to once again move them towards shovel ready. So discussions are happening. We have a meeting coming up with finance to discuss this further and figure out options. I just don't have an answer today on that funding source to make that project work today.
Thank you, Councillor. GM Burden wishes to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. General Manager Angie Burden, Healthy and Safe Communities. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Nan. My understanding is that the policy development was paused during COVID. However, it really is not a policy issue as much as a financial issue. So because the province mandates under the DC Act the collection by the municipality of the DC charges to properly pace the development and enhancement of municipal services according to growth, we as a municipality must collect those fees. When we waive and provide an exemption, we must identify a funding source. And I do want to go back to Al Fletcher's initial comments about the city being excited about all of the affordable housing projects that are under development. What we have is a challenge in how do we fund those developments, both with some of the examples that Al Fletcher used, both for development charges, overages, other pieces as the costs are skyrocketing. And so what we do need is a sustainable strategy. And one of the challenges too is that as we look at a project by project, there is a business case for each one to have those development charges waived. And there are many other projects that are in the same boat and would also be deserving of consideration around how do we prioritize and how do we ensure that all of the good work underway actually reaches the full completion of projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. General Manager, you're making me think about a lot of things now in terms of a sustainable strategy. It makes me think about the prospect of our vacant homes tax and any revenue that's generated going towards not-for-profit affordable housing and being a pot of funds that we might be able to draw on as a municipality in order to fill the gaps where they exist and be very, very clear about some potential stipulation and clear criteria about where and how those funds will go, and specifically not-for-profit housing in perpetuity makes the case. So I'll sidebar that. Back to the questions related to the delegation. So when we were discussing the 2019 policy, was the municipality aware of the 19 projects that are currently in jeopardy? Because my understanding of the work that's been done, the exceptional work that Housing Services continues to do to work in partnership with so many of our not-for-profit housing partners, and then that much more so since the Hamilton is Home Coalition has been formed, is we've been very much in tandem with this sector in their projects coming down the pipe and them putting their applications forward. Were we not aware in 2019 that we were potentially putting these significant hundreds of affordable housing units in jeopardy?
GM Burden, if you want to take a kick at it.
Through the chair to the councillor, I'll ask Al Fletcher to answer that question.
Mr. Fletcher, please.
Thank you, through the chair. I would say some of them would have been known, but not all of them. If you think of Caledon, for example, that was the land transfer or land purchase happened in 2020. I would suggest that many of the projects are probably 2020 and forward to today. I wasn't here at that point in time, but just looking at the projects that are out there and where they are in the planning process, I would suspect most of them are post 2019.
Councillor?
Sorry, just taking notes as I'm going to pause there. I need a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Danko, please. You're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And going back to 2019, I believe you were the chair of the DC Advisory Committee. I was the vice chair. And my clear recollection of that decision was that we were removing the exemption, the DC exemption for affordable housing, and the specific recommendation by Watson Associates was to replace that with an equivalent incentive program.
Correct.
And because of COVID, because of everything that kind of happened in between, as Mr. Fletcher has said, that hasn't actually been formalized. So that's my memory of that decision and the intention of that decision.
Mr. Kovacevic?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just wish to clarify that the exemption in the bylaw exists, and it provides that until such time as the Housing Services Division develops and implements a DC incentive program, the exemption exists. So the exemption was not removed, it still exists, but there's a qualification on that exemption, which is what I explained earlier. The exemption does not apply when the funding that they get from the other government source provides for the payment of DCs. And I cannot recall whether that's the exact exemption that applied in the previous bylaw, but I believe Ms. Gillies is on the meeting and she can speak to whether that same exclusion for the exemption applied in the previous version of the DC bylaw.
Ms. Gillies?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. So I apologize. I joined this meeting partway through the delegation, but in terms of the language that is in the city's 2019 development charge bylaw, limiting the exemption in cases where the upper level funding provides DCs as an eligible cost, that language has existed in the city's development charge bylaw since at least 2004. That is not new language. What we are seeing here is that the province, co-investment, CMHC have changed the way that their programs are structured, and they now do include DCs as an eligible expense. So this is the first time the city is getting caught up by that section.
Thank you. Councillor Danko.
Thank you. And I'll take responsibility for that. I mean, back in 2019, obviously, I would have never anticipated where we are now, that the province and the federal government would change that. And I think we're now in a chicken and an egg scenario where the CMHC co-investment funding has DCs as an eligible expense, but they can't get the funding without DCs as an exemption. So through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess another thing is that the total CMHC funding, just using 60 Caledon as, a specific project, but I think it applies to most projects, is only a portion of the total funding. So would it be possible to break those out, to exempt 85% of a project that is not funded, CMHC funded, that has other funding, and only apply DCs to the portion of the project that is funded through CMHC?
Mr. Fletcher or Mr. Kovacevic?
Through the chair to the councillor, I would have to defer to legal if that is permitted to do that. I am not familiar, nor have I been experienced with that to date.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kovacevic, go ahead.
We have another solicitor at the meeting, Mr. Knudsen, who is more involved in the 60 particulars of the 60 Caledon project, and can speak to the funding that is in place there. My assumption would be the funding is provided for the whole project, not for specific portions, but he can speak to that, hopefully.
Through the chair, Anders Knudsen, Solicitor with Legal Services. So actually the funding provided that I was involved in on this project was a grant of land, not some flow-through funding from upper levels of government. So in that case, there wouldn't be the same application of the exemption. So it's an interesting question that the councillor raises, but I don't know how it would apply in this circumstance if there was another funding source than CMHC, and that was ineligible for use for
if you could turn off your camera, there you go. Now speak and let's see what
to allocate.
Perfect, thank you. Could you say that all again after you turn your camera off, because we could not hear you because you were like that, and that didn't help us. These
Excuse me,
lawyers,
through,
it's an IT thing. I
it
don't
must
have
be
WebEx,
my,
Madam Clerk. Can you help him out there? How does he turn off his camera? There he goes. Are you still with us? Can you speak?
so I can hear you, Councillor. I'm afraid I didn't hear, did my video or audio get cut off?
Yes, it did. So
Okay,
we
so
need to hear
you
that
heard almost
response
nothing.
again, please. I'm sorry.
Okay, my apologies. I'll try again. So my role on and the funding that the city provided for 60 Caledon was through a grant of land. It was a forgivable loan for a term and secured by a vendor take back mortgage on the sale of the property. So that funding source would not be conceived of under the DC exemption, as it's not a funding source from another level of government.
Thank you. Councillor Danko.
No, it just, I guess the point is that if only a portion of the funding is triggering this clause, which makes them ineligible for DCs, it's putting the entire project at risk.
Mr. Kovacevic, you've raised your hand again.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I believe the exemption would not work the way that Councillor Danko is hoping. It provides that if the project has been approved to receive construction funding from the Government of Canada, so it's quite broad, in other words. And if the dwelling units in question have received construction funding, they're not eligible for the DC exemption.
So if they receive 1% CMHC funding, 10%, 50%, 100%, doesn't matter. They're not eligible for a DC exemption.
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct.
Thank you. So again, I think what's clear here to committee is just the number of roadblocks that are in front of us. You know, from what was just said about, you know, doesn't matter how much CMHC funding is. You know, in terms of the 60 Caledon project, I had been talking with staff about just bringing a motion to council to exempt them from DCs for the 8.3 million. My understanding is I can't do that because that would be, you know, a one-off for a specific project that it would be a violation of the bylaw that it has to apply to, you know, to everybody equally. Then we have the accounting exercise here that even if we were to exempt a project from DCs, we still have to fund those DCs from another source, which is a paper accounting exercise that is a roadblock because, you know, the city's not out, you know, we're not out cash, we're just simply not collecting money. But yet we still have to fund it from another source, which again doesn't make sense. So my last question is, if we were to wait to remove that clause from the DC bylaw that says there's no exemption where DCs are an eligible expense, if we were to simply remove that clause, then we would have to fund the DC exemptions from another source. Could that funding source be the property taxes that are then paid on those projects that proceed? So again, a paper accounting exercise, basically.
Mr. McMullen?
So through the chair, good afternoon. So the suggestion is that could the future property taxes that would be paid on that property, could then they be used to fund whatever the $8 million that we are then waiving on the DCs?
Let's use a hypothetical example. If you have a $10 million DC exemption that needs to be funded from another source, can that funding source then be annualized over the future property taxes that the development would then pay?
Mr. McMullen?
I would say presumably, yes, we could do that. Now, I don't know what the potential property taxes are on that particular, we haven't done that calculation as far as I know, unless Al Fletcher has got that information from someone in our finance area.
Thank you. So I guess, Mr. Chairman, just to try to wrap this up, you know, from your instructions of how to move forward here, that really at this committee level, and I'm not a member of this committee, so I can't put anything on the table anyway. But I did put some language in the chat, a suggestion that we might be able to bring to council tomorrow, that staff investigate opportunities for the city of Hamilton to provide a forgivable loan, a subsidy agreement, exemption, or other financial incentive program related to required payment for development charges sufficient to maintain qualification for CMHC funding. We could put that on the table at council tomorrow. We're not making a specific decision. I'm a little bit hesitant to just put something on the table that potentially would have a $39 million impact on, you know, on our finances. And then the intention would be that in August, when we come back for our final summer council meeting, we could have, you know, staff have something prepared that then we could then pass or discuss that would eliminate that clause that there's no exemption when DCs are an eligible expense. So I'm not sure what committee thinks of that. I'd be interested to hear, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
I'm seeing nodding heads, Councillor. Councillor Nan, can you take the chair for a second, please?
Certainly, the floor is yours.
So, Mr. McMullen, if you could turn your camera on. So procedurally, this has to go before council because the decision has already been rendered at council. If we do a one-off exemption for this particular development at 60 Caledon Avenue, did we not already deny development charge exemptions? We had hearings at the AFNA committee level. One of them I could not participate. Can you advise what we've already dealt with and how does that jeopardize where we are?
So through the chair, looks like Mr. Kovacevic would like to take that one.
Oh, you're off the hook, dude.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Councillor Danko indicated previously, a one-off exemption is not available in this because you would need to amend the bylaw. Underneath the Development Charges Act, to amend the bylaw, you need a background study to determine what the amendment in the bylaw would do. In this case, I don't know. Would it require an increase in the rest of the charges to make up for the exemption, or would the exemption that would be accorded by removing the clause be funded through the general levy? I think Ms. Gillies can speak to how the other exemptions are generally funded in the bylaw. And the other bar to providing a one-off exemption in this situation is, it's my understanding, as I indicated, I have limited knowledge of the facts on this particular project. Perhaps Mr. Knudsen can speak to this, but in this case, the project provider is actually not a nonprofit. It's an unlimited partnership, which is a for-profit entity on its face, and therefore any one-off exemption would likely violate the prohibition on bonusing. So you have to consider that. So there's a number of factors in play that would need to be considered, but exemption to the bylaw would need an amendment to the bylaw, which would need a background study prepared. And there are other considerations with if you tried to waive or provide a grant or funding for this in terms of the entity that is developing the project.
So let's speak to that, if I may, Chair Nan. What prevents the City of Hamilton from providing a grant of $8 million to offset the DCs?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as I indicated, one problem may be, and I would need to confirm whether the entity who is undertaking the development of it is a profit or not profit. So you have to be cognizant of the prohibition in the Municipal Act against bonusing. There may be an avenue to explore here. There is a municipal capital facility bylaw that has been passed for this project. And that is how the Parkland dedication fees were waived. I'm do not have all the details, but that may be one way in which to facilitate a grant or funding of the DCs is through an amendment to that municipal capital facility bylaw. I don't know at this point, and I've just discussed it briefly with Mr. Knudsen via emails back and forth during this meeting. That could be explored fuller and to a greater extent, but once again, a funding source would need to be determined for that grant in order to move forward. I don't know, Mr. Knudsen, if you have anything in addition to say to what I've said to committee and the chair.
To the chair, no, I echo the comment that there is already an existing bylaw which was passed for the sale and the grant of land. So conceivably that could be amended or furthered to encompass any additional grant.
So Chair Nan,
Yep.
I'm feeling frustrated. Every question we ask, there appears to be a hurdle to helping 60 Caledon. If we ask one question, staff says, no, you can't do it because of this. If we ask a different question, you can't do it because of this. And so I'm at the point where I would rather ask staff to review this situation and come up with a viable solution that can be presented to council. I look to the clerk. Is it within the realm of this committee to ask GM Burden and her staff to do that?
I believe we can do that, yes, Councillor.
So I think that's what you will want to do, committee members, is move a motion to direct GM Burden and all of our staff, including the senior leadership team, to review this situation and come up with viable options, because I don't think anyone around this table wants to hear in 2 weeks' time that this project is now dead because we couldn't get our act together. And I don't mean to sound disparaging, but I really believe that we have to do something. And so we need the assistance of staff to get us there. Those are all my comments, Councillor Nan. I'll take the chair back from you. Any further comments or questions from the committee? Councillor Jackson and then Councillor Nan.
Chair Clark, I was going to ask about the motion you'd want to put, so that's why I was going to do it through your vice chair, but if you could just answer me directly, that's fine too. I really like the proactive way that you're trying to keep 60 Caledon moving forward without being in jeopardy. So all I would ask is, to your motion, what about Sarah and Trish's 19 other projects? I don't want to leave them behind as we solve potentially Caledon, or do you anticipate there'll be a broader discussion tomorrow at council? Thank you, Chair Clark.
That's an excellent question. GM Burden?
Thank you, through the chair, to the councillors. I'm wondering if it would be helpful with that report back if we could also include any known or anticipated in-year requests for other similar projects to waive development charges. If that would be helpful, that would be something we could take back.
I think that would cover off your concern, Councillor Jackson. That would capture them. Thank you. Councillor Nan?
Councillor Jackson made the same point I wanted to, which was around the additional projects that are known to us that are facing a similar situation. So I have proposed language that I'm typing into the chat. Hold on.
If you can pull it up and read it for us, because I don't have chat. They don't give it to me.
I forgot, Chair. I apologize.
Bad boy once and they take something
Yeah,
like that
right.
away from you, right?
So that therefore be it resolved that General Manager Burden and city staff review the 60 Caledon situation and other known and in-year requests of not-for-profit housing developments and come up with a viable solution and report back.
And that would include Hamilton is Home, GM
Yes.
Burden.
Thank you, through the chair. If I might make a friendly
Sure.
amendment to that, if we could say known and or expected in-year requests. And I might also request that we do it in partnership with the GM of Corporate Services to ensure that we have all of the divisions to bear here.
Thank you. The clerk is writing feverishly. Go ahead, clerk.
I'm just curious about when the report back would be anticipated. Are we looking at tomorrow's council or next cycle?
August, I
I
believe,
would
would be
suspect the next
sufficient.
cycle of
Okay.
August 12th.
As I suspected, just wanted to confirm that.
I don't think anyone can do it overnight. Okay, so we have the wording. Any comments or questions from the committee members? Councillor Jackson, please, sir.
Yep, not try to be pedantic here, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of my favorite words, not try to be pedantic. However, I like where Councillor Nan's going, more comprehensively and all-encompassing. Terrific, I support. I support your site-specific with Caledon. I'm just asking now, in light of this, and if we approve these two motions today, does that preempt even a broader discussion with the rest of our council colleagues tomorrow? Because I think all of council needs to know what it did and the ramifications of what it did. I'm just asking both of you as movers. Thank you.
I don't think we will have this report before council tomorrow. If you want to draft the motion and instead of presenting it here and passing it, will the minutes of this meeting be on the docket for council on Friday?
Yes, as soon as we are finished here, I will be preparing the report to go directly to council for tomorrow. So a motion here would be fine. If I could clarify, I did hear Councillor Jackson say 2 motions, and as far as I'm aware, it's only 1. I didn't hear 2.
Elsie Bates, I thought Chair Clark was moving specifically about 60 to make it happen, 60 Caledon. And then also Councillor Nan was about, let's not forget the other 19 from Hamilton is Homes as well. Or is that all going to be merged together? That's all. Thank you.
Our preference would be to merge it all together, Councillor. It just makes it easier. And so then, councillors, you have an opportunity then tomorrow at council to get into it in a little bit more detail because it will be in the agenda. Are we good, GM Burden? Yes. Madam Clerk, are we good?
Yes, so the motion will be that General Manager of Healthy and Safe Communities and the General Manager of Corporate Services with other city staff will review the proposal for 60 Caledon and other known in-year other known or expected in-year requests to bring to the report back to council at the next cycle. So August 12th, I believe the date is.
Mm-hmm. But to be clear, the motion will be on the agenda at the next council meeting.
That's correct.
And then the follow-up will be August 12th.
That is correct.
Does everybody understand? Councillor Nan, please.
Yeah, understood. Just wanted to clarify that it's not for profit housing developments.
Madam Clerk, we can include that. Ms. Gagnon, is yours a not-for-profit development? Just yes or no. Ms. Gagne, is your development a not-for-profit development? Committee members, will you allow Ms. Gagne to answer that question? They're nodding yes, please. Come back into the microphone. It's very unorthodox, but that's the kind of guy I am.
Unorthodox because it is an unorthodox situation. Mm-hmm. I heard what was said, and yes, my understanding is, in terms of law, a limited partnership, by definition, is supposed to generate profit. Honestly, our 2 nonprofit organizations use the limited partnership only as a structure. only as a vehicle for us to work together on such a large site, because neither of us could come up with the $44 million on our own. So we created the limited partnership, but the two shareholders are only the nonprofit organizations, and our missions of nonprofit are fed into the limited partnership agreement. We have faced this comment from legal departments each step of the way. We had to get CMHC to agree as well, that we are only using it as a shell, as a vehicle for us to work together. And they have agreed to allow their co-investment. Their legal department finally came around and said, you're right, you're a limited partnership, but we recognize it is a partnership of two nonprofits.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest then that you and your board have your staff forward documentation to the City of Hamilton that would address all of those issues, please. Okay, councillors, we're ready to go on the motion as read. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson, and it's a recorded vote. No problem. We're just waiting for eScribe to cooperate with us. And the vote is up. There it goes. And that vote carried 3-0. Thank you to the delegates. Thank you to the staff. We appreciate it. We're now moving on to item number 9.2, councillors, Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters Initiative. I'd like to call upon Ed Fothergill, Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, to come forward to the podium to begin your delegation, please. It's almost good evening, but we'll stick with good afternoon.
Used to the morning presentations, but this works. Thank you, Councillor Clark, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public. My name is Ed Fothergill. I'm one of the members of the HATS group. We're an organization that's helping to provide an input to the solution of homelessness. We know this is an important initiative at the city. We understand the city has set a goal of getting rid of homelessness by the year 2025. We think that's an honorable objective, and we have an important project that we think can help achieve those goals. We were in front of you in February and presented initial plans. At that time, I think we were asked to go back, do some more homework, work on finding a property, and then come back to this committee. So what we'd like to do today is provide you that overview, tell you what we've been doing, where we've been going, where we are, and what our expectations are moving forward. At this point, we have not found a property that we would like. We were hoping we would come to you. We have looked at quite a few sites already, some owned by the city, others are private properties. At this point, we have not narrowed down one that we think can fit. We would like to say we do appreciate the help from staff. Ms. Burden has been very helpful. Jason Thorne has taken a personal interest in this, and they have made themselves available, and they're continuing to help us, which we feel is a big help. In the meantime, we've been putting together our plans and our team, and you'll hear from other members of our team today. We've done extensive research on how this kind of project has been successful throughout Canada, and what some of the pitfalls are, what things we should be looking for. We've established ourselves as a strong organization. We've interviewed people that we feel or that we know will need this kind of service. And Tony will talk about that later. And we've also talked to other service providers in the city, because this is a multifaceted issue. We've talked to people that will provide services on site. We've also talked to other providers. We had earlier Don Seymour here from Wesley Center. He couldn't stay, unfortunately. But we've had good talks with Wesley, and we're making contacts with them. And our program will be integrated as much as we can with what they're doing. The same with Indwell, who are housing providers, as you know. We've talked with them. They feel our project will be a good fit with the services they provide. They've told us that in some cases, people that they're serving in affordable housing units aren't ready to be housed. They need some kind of intermediate provision moving from the streets to housing, and they feel our HATS program is a very good fit. And we're working closely with them, both in terms of how we transition people from the street into housing, and also how we might help find us a property. So we've had a tremendous amount of support. All of the community support groups we've talked to have embraced this idea. Our research has showed that this model works. There's a tremendous need, and we understand it's only part of the puzzle. But it is an important part, and we will be continuing with it. We hope to come back to you shortly with a site. The winter is fast approaching, so we are going to double down our efforts to be looking at properties. We want to continue to work with staff. One of the areas we suggested we would consider is maybe some city parks, either that are developed or in development, that might be appropriate. So we want to put those on the table as well. We're still looking at private sites as well. And through this process and continuing to advertise what we're doing, hopefully someone might come forward with a site that could work for us. So at this point, it's a work in progress. We feel even more than ever that there's a need for the project, and we're anxious to set something in place before the winter comes. So others will follow me. Bill will talk about work that he has done. He, I think, is probably the Canadian expert on these kinds of projects. He has researched projects throughout Canada and the US. And Tony has great experience with the Waterloo project, and he will talk. And finally, Paula, who's part of our group as well, we'll talk about some of the services that will be provided. Before I leave, I would just say this came late, unfortunately, but we've put together a very comprehensive report that summarizes all of the findings we have come up with to date. It's dated July. It was just hot off the press this week. We've left it with the secretary. So you have it, and I would ask that when you have time to look through it, and certainly we're always available to come back to the committee and answer any questions.
Was this one of the ones that was put up on the webpage? That's
correct, yes. We apologize. We'd hoped to have it earlier, but it's there, and it's actually quite well written.
It's understandable. Councillors, I'm going to suggest that for the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters initiative, that we wait until their last delegate appears, and then we can ask questions and we can hear from any one of them. They can all come up to the podium at the same time. Okay, just to keep things moving along. So thank you very much, Mr. Fothergill. The next presenter would be Tony Stortz, Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters. Want to come down, Tony?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to stay here or back up, or?
It's up to you, but usually you go back up and we'll bring you right back down.
That's quite all right.
Thank you. Good to see you again, sir. How are you?
You too. Never better.
Awesome.
Yeah, do you mind if I put this here? Great, thank you.
If you drop it, it's not our fault.
Oh, there. So much for my new laptop. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chair Clark.
Only 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair Clark, members of the committee, staff, and some of my favorite guests here. My name is Tony D'Amato Stortz, and I'm here to present the findings from HATS's consultation with people experiencing homelessness. So between February 7th and March 3rd, the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters conducted interviews with 36 people with current or recent lived experience of unsheltered homelessness. Now, Chair Clark, you mentioned sort of that old school language, so to make it way more simple, these are people who are spending their nights on the concretes, park benches, and forested areas in Hamilton. The purpose of these interviews was to see if there is a need for this community of tiny shelters, to learn how they would want that program structured, and to find the ideal location for this within Hamilton. And our data through this shows a very, very clear mandate, with 97.2% of the respondents saying they would be interested in a home if one was available to them. Now, members of this committee, you're all in politics, and you know you don't see 97% agreement for anything, especially not within this community. This shows a really, really clear need for these people who are not being served by other services, that the tiny homes model would work for them. Now, when we asked them why they liked the tiny homes, they talked about the safety of having a locking door, they talked about being in their own space, and they talked about the benefits of it being small. They also said that they wanted to be somewhere where they can have a relationship and they don't have to choose between being indoors and giving their dog up for adoption. When we talked more about the preferred location, they told us that they wanted it to be outside the downtown core, being close enough to access services, but not so close that the problems of downtown life came knocking. They wanted sort of a bit of a fresh start. After that, we discussed the rules, and these folks told us that they wanted a site free from open drug use, violence, and illegal weapons. They recognized the importance of being good neighbors, and they also wanted, they realized that consequences were important for actions, but for warnings and opportunities for redemption as well. Finally, with this, we asked them about the services so that we knew that what we were bringing on site was what would really speak to them. We talked about everything from addiction support to Wi-Fi, and here a really clear picture emerges with the stabilization services at the top, skills development and connection in the middle, and deliveries down at the bottom. To us, this spoke to a desire for autonomy and opportunity rather than things being brought door to door, which was really refreshing and also mirrors the experience in other communities. If you're curious about these details and some more data, there's a lot more in the full report, which should be included in your council package. But beyond the numbers, the real beauty of being able to do this project is that we got to take the people who live homelessness every day and their voices and bring them in on the conversations about how to solve it. This is a group that's often discussed, but rarely listened to. So in that spirit, I'll finish up with a quote from one of the interviews. When we asked one gentleman why he liked the tiny homes, he said, "Everyone wants to own their own house. That's the dream. It's my dream anyways. When you have such a small space, you'd be utilizing every square inch, and it gives you limits on storing useless items that you haven't touched in years. You have overall say on who can come in and who can't. It's freedom in a confined area. You don't get the best of both too often." Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you. That was well within your time limit.
That's what I go for.
Our next delegate is Bill Johnson. Bill, if you want to come down, please. And again, this is the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of staff, members of the public, members of the committee, and I'm much more low-tech than Tony. Back in February, GM Angie Burden suggested HATS do a scan of existing transitional tiny cabin villages. As a former journalist, I took this on as a reporting project, searching the internet and interviewing people operating all of the tiny cabin villages in Canada. Here's a quick summary of what turned into a 100-page report. In Canada, there have been tiny cabin villages in 5 cities, and more are coming. Kitchener, Kingston, Victoria, and Duncan, BC are currently operating tiny cabin villages for homeless people, and London ran winter villages in both 2021 and 2022. Vancouver has approved one to launch in September as a 2-year pilot. Groups in Woodstock and Peterborough have access to private land on which they hope to create tiny cabin villages. And in the States, there is something like 100 of these tiny cabin villages of various sizes. So far, all of the Canadian ones, all 5, have been on either city-owned land or land that the city has arranged, for instance, through a lease. And every one of them has had either partial or complete funding from the city, although sometimes that was the flow through of pandemic funding. One advantage of the tiny cabin villages is the low capital cost and the speed of implementation once you have land. But there's also a fair bit of evidence that they serve their residents really well. At minimum, they get people out of the dangers of life on the streets and provide a stability that's impossible when you're unhoused. They provide the privacy of your own space while also creating a community among the residents, staff, and volunteers that fosters both belonging and mutual support. They provide access to a range of services, allowing residents at their own pace to deal with physical and mental health challenges, to access harm reduction services, to get ID and income support, etc. And they help residents prepare and ultimately to move to permanent housing. I was only able to find 2 comparative studies. One's in Denver. Academics at the University of Denver have tracked residents of the tiny cabin village in that city since 2017, and they've compared them with a control group, a similar group of people, those on the wait list to get into the cabin village. Year by year, the residents of the village do better in terms of housing and financial stability, employment readiness, emotional well-being, and physical health than their peers who aren't in the village. In Seattle, a higher percentage of residents of tiny cabin villages move into permanent housing than residents of traditional shelters, or even that city's enhanced shelters that are specifically designed to help people move into housing. Of course, the transition to housing depends on a couple of things, including the supply of affordable housing to move into, the services that are provided on the site, and the people that the sites are actually serving. London, for instance, ran 2 different tiny cabin villages for 3 months in the winter of 2022. One group of residents had fairly low levels of need, and 18 of 29 of them moved into permanent housing. The other group had fairly high needs, and 13 of 28 moved into housing, 7 of them into permanent housing. Our research also turned up about 100 ideas based on the experiences of existing tiny cabin villages, either in the United States or Canada. Here's just a quick sample. Locate the site away from the immediate city core, but close to transit. Contact neighbors of a proposed site early and create an ongoing liaison committee for regular two-way communications. Involve people with lived experience and decisions, and specifically involve the residents in various participation, at least regular meetings. Ensure resident selection is inclusive, develop and communicate clear expectations of behavior for the residents, have a reasonable ratio of staff to residents, have an indoor common space for all weather gatherings and meetings with service providers, provide on-site laundry and food, provide lots of options for health, harm reduction, social and housing services. And this one I heard repeatedly, be patient. People who've spent a long time in the streets need time. They need time to adjust to having shelter. They need time to acquire ID and income. They need time to deal with health and other challenges. Most of Canada's transitional tiny cabin villages are or have been temporary experiments so far. I asked everyone I talked to if they see them as a useful part of the continuum of housing and homeless services, and with one qualification, they all said, yes. I welcome your questions.
Wow, 7 seconds left. You timed that perfectly. If you would mind taking your seat, we'll have Paula Whitlow, the Hamilton Wentworth Chapter Native Women's Incorporated, respecting the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters, and then we'll entertain questions of the delegates. Just pull that microphone down so that we can hear you. There you go. Perfect.
Sego, Scano, Seguego, Annie, bonjour, greetings, and thank you very much for making time for us today. We really appreciate that. I'm going to talk more about the wraparound support. So you may recall the last time I spoke in this forum, I spoke in support of HATS being part of the solution towards the reduction of emergency service, police calls, and emergency room visits. Corrections and jails have become a warehouse of people who are being criminalized for being homeless. This creates an already overburdened system to be untenable. From an unhoused perspective, there is hope and relative comfort of having food, shelter, supports, and other supplies all within the same location. The impossibility of carrying all their belongings everywhere or abandoning them altogether. HATS has put a lot of effort in securing community support and systems that provide proper resources required for this population. We know from our research, wraparound care and support make the difference. We are not just trying to find a solution, we are also hopeful we can make an impact in someone's life and that there's looking for a hand up, not just a handout. One example is Wesley. Support workers will be experienced, trauma-informed, meeting the person where they're at, providing triage and case management. Support workers aren't there to do things for the client, but rather to be a navigator and to assist a person in moving forward and working towards accomplishing their goals. It is more than likely that support workers already know many of the clients and would be the first cohort of HATS. They would already have built relationships with this community. Relationships, trust, and respect are key elements in working with this population. Listening, learning, understanding, having empathy, that's half of the issue right there. Wesley is supporting HATS by offering staff for case management, outreach support, assistance with finding permanent supportive housing, landlord liaison support, and system navigation. Wesley, along with other service providers, will be looking to offer supportive housing to people transitioning from the tiny shelters. In addition, Wesley will be supporting the tiny shelter community with meals and shower facilities. Being Indigenous, I know that HATS is open to fostering a greater relationship with the Indigenous community. We all know that most pit counts have a disproportionate amount of Indigenous overrepresentation in the homeless populations. It's time to truly take action with the land acknowledgement and model the dish with one spoon. Sharing, taking only what you need, keeping the spoon clean, and looking out for one another. So in parting, I would like to say that we are indeed requiring land for this project, and we really hope for your support. Yeah.
Thank you. That was well within your timeline. If you want to stay where you are, Bill, Ed, and Tony, if you want to come down, and we'll entertain questions from the committee. Councillors, questions for our delegates? Councillor Jackson, please.
Thank you, Chairman Clark, and thanks to all the delegates in bringing us up to date on surveys and consultation and results and pursuits. If I could just ask a question that is somewhat a little disturbing to me, but I'm sure there's a darn good explanation for it. Both Mr. Johnston and Mr. Storts both reference with the 97.2% that they want to be far away from the downtown for concerns. On its own, that statement's quite an indictment against our emerging and restoration of all the good stuff going downtown, but maybe there's an explanation there from the client standpoint that I need to hear, Mr. Chairman. Through you, please.
Tony, you were the one that made the point, please.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair. So far away may be a bit more of a relative term. So with these folks, what we were looking at was a 20 to 40 minute walk from the downtown core. That's what they identified as sort of this Goldilocks zone. Now, by car, that might be a 5-minute drive, really not what we would consider far away. It's not out, on the other side of a highway. It's really more of a walking distance thing. And for the reasoning behind it, what I would compare it to is why people go away to university rather than stay in their hometown. If you're looking to reinvent yourself, sometimes it helps to have a little bit of distance. That's not an indictment of where you came from, but it just shows that you want to grow. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson?
Okay, I appreciate Mr. Start's that explanation and description, and I accept that in the spirit of what it was given. I just didn't want for the general public, in spite of the clientele we're trying to house, I just didn't want to leave that statement out there of the downtown and being away from the downtown, because I'm proud of all the good things that the city primarily has been doing downtown with private investment and public investment, et cetera. But I appreciate the explanation. Thank you, Chairman Clark.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a question back to the delegation about your next steps. And you mentioned that you're working collaboratively with the city as per previous direction from this committee and supported by council. So you're just giving us the update and you're continuing the efforts to try and land a location, correct?
That's correct, yes. And there are a number of specific sites that we are investigating further, but we're always open to new suggestions.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. That was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor, if you can take the chair for a second, please.
Certainly, go ahead.
The 97.2 respondents, how many interviews were there, Chair?
Through you, Chair, there were 36 interviews conducted. Yeah, so one person.
Thank you. And in your presentation, one of your slides showed a 3-strike rule.
Yes.
Can you elaborate?
Yes, so part of what we did with this consultation was to open up the field and say to the people with this lived experience, we asked them about the rules and the guidelines of living in this community, if they were to be there, what they would want to see. And then the next question was, if one of your neighbors violates that, how do you think it should be addressed? Because, what we may see as fair through our sort of middle-class lens may not be what works in the reality of this lifestyle. And they provided a bunch of different options, one of which was a 3-strike rule, one of which was restorative justice, and then others were more sort of immediate eviction focus. And that reflects the diversity in this community too. So in your report, the full person with lived experience report, those are broken down comprehensively by how many people suggested what option.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, the 3-strike rule, thank you, Ed, is it's like baseball. 3 strikes and you're out. Yeah.
Sorry, you're talking to someone who doesn't play baseball.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
I think of the 3-strike rule in the United States with felonies, that when you get to the final 3 strikes, now you're in for a long time.
Oh,
so
yes. Yeah.
That's why I was trying to understand the clarification, and that's on me, not
Understood.
on you.
No, thank you. That makes sense.
Thank you. Some of the conversations that I've had with folks who have found themselves homeless have indicated that they deem themselves to be prey. And by that, what they're telling us is that there are other people who are homeless or may not be homeless who prey upon the homeless, trying to get their government benefits checked, trying to get money out of them, and they're bullied and abused. How do you address that when you're trying to set up a 10 or 20 unit community?
Thank you. Yes, through you, Chair, that's an excellent point. And what you get into with these folks who are, actively sleeping outdoors is one of the terms we see is the hardest to house. These are the people who have not fit within the traditional shelter system, the traditional affordable housing system, the traditional employment system, and they've often been failed by institutions from education, through youth criminal justice, through the criminal justice system, and then the incarceration system, and then the homelessness and outreach system. So what we get with a lot of these is folks who have fallen through the cracks. Now, there's a way that I look at it, and it's sort of in terms of acuity. So on one end is your more sort of hardcore out of prison, somebody who is very well versed with the police system, and on the other end is someone who may be very nervous. And these folks could follow a normal distribution. This is just for the sake of argument. Now, the traditional shelter system does a great job at a lot of things, and it does try to fix or help as many folks as possible. But you have those long tails of people who may not fit for one reason or another. And who we're going to target through this project is still something that we're working through as a committee, the types of folks who we want to see with this, but it will probably address those long tails.
So can I ask Chair Nan, residents who are deeming themselves to be prey and are experiencing violence, threats, assaults in our shelter system. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not a pretty world, and so they now are afraid of going into that shelter system because of that abuse, and they don't want to meet that guy who wants to take their benefit check. How do we help them that if we're going to create a community like this, now I understand the intent, the hope is that it would be a 20 or 30 minute walk away from downtown. I can't speak for the residents who have said that to you, but the inclination I have from some of the conversations, and I have not had many, is that they want to get away from the downtown because that's where the abuse and the violence is happening. That's where they're being targeted. Tony, can you speak to that? Because you have had the closest conversations with many of the homeless people in our community to date.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Chair. You're absolutely right. But a lot of the challenge and a lot of the vulnerability comes in isolation. So part of what this project hopes to do is create that strong supportive community of peer support and mutual support. And when you combine that with a little bit of distance and a little bit of staffing and the supportive services of great agencies like Wesley, what we can create is a community that supports each other and helps keep each other safe from those individuals who may come in seeking to do harm. But there's always more security in community than in isolation in a tent in the woods or a park bench.
That's well put. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Councillor Nan, I'll take the chair back to my colleagues. Do any of you have any further questions of this particular group? They're saying no. Thank you very much for attending today and keeping us informed as to where you're going. I understand that our staff have been working with you, and that's we are all hopeful that we're going to find a location.
We are too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Tony. The next delegate is 9.3, Nancy Silva-Khan. Is Nancy here? On the WebEx. Nancy, are you there? Nancy, if you can hear me, please turn on your microphone and your camera.
Hi there, sorry about that.
If you could get closer to your microphone, and you wish to turn on your camera. There you are.
Hi.
Hi, Nancy. You have 5 minutes, please.
My name is Nancy Silva-Khan, and some of you might remember me as the mother of nonverbal twins on the autism spectrum. I came to you in 2016 and again in 2019 requesting help with the Autism Ontario program. Today I come to you due to the events of June 12th. On June 12th, families like ours were glued to their phones watching our nightmare unfold for a family in Cawthra Lakes, Ontario. 11-year-old Draven Graham, also diagnosed with autism, had wandered away from his caregivers. Police, his family, and his community desperately searched for him throughout the night, and sadly, the end to his story was a tragic one on June 13th. When a child goes missing, we know that every second counts. This is extremely true when the child has a developmental disability and lacks safety skills and communication skills. The same also applies to any adult or senior who lacks an understanding of safety and becomes disoriented and confused without assistance. The Amber Alert was created and continues to be used specifically for children who are suspected to have been abducted. Families grappling with tangible fears are wondering why an alert geared towards situations such as the one Draven's family experienced has not been developed, rather than relying on word of mouth and social media networks. Which leads me to my request to this committee in the City of Hamilton. The request being that a motion be put forward to request the Province of Ontario develop and implement a community warning program similar to Amber Alert for those persons of special needs or circumstances who leave their caregivers or safe location and have a potential of putting themselves in high-risk situations with tragic results in response to the death of the 11-year-old Draven Graham of Cawthra Lakes, Ontario. This motion that I'm requesting has been unanimously passed in Oshawa on June 15th, and several municipalities have followed similar ones. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. That is well within your 5 minutes. Councillors, do you have any questions of our delegate? Councillor Jackson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Clark. And Nancy, I do recall you both last term of council and this. Good to see you again, and hoping your advocacy has been paying off between the provincial government and different ministers and that overall. Any quick update on that?
In some cases, there's been progress, but it's kind of been frozen. So a lot of the advocacy continues, unfortunately.
So thank you. So do you have a motion for us that you have drafted and scripted that other municipalities have used, please? Because I'd be happy to move it. I just can't put something together on the fly like you have 100 times more knowledge than I would.
I do have a draft that was passed in Oshawa. So if you want, I could read it to you.
Is that fair, Chair Clark? I'll leave that to your discretion.
How long is the motion, Nancy?
It's pretty short. It's about a paragraph long.
Yep, please proceed.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Clark.
Whereas we have all become aware of the recent tragic death of Draven Graham, an 11-year-old child on the autism spectrum, after walking away from the family home, and whereas the Amber Alert has been very effective in announcing to the public children who have been abducted, and whereas a similar alert program for those who have special needs who leave family custody would be seen to be warranted in the province of Ontario, be it resolved that the Council of the City of Hamilton, in this case, requests the province of Ontario to develop and implement a community warning program similar to Amber Alert for those persons of special needs or circumstances who leave the caregivers or locations and potentially put themselves at risk.
Chair Clark, I think I understood exactly where Nancy was going with this motion, and I would maybe just add in the words somewhere where the request is that the province look at the feasibility of including it in the Amber Alert program. I would be satisfied to move that unless yourself, Councillor Nan, or staff have a timeout and if there's a potential downside to that. Thank you, Chairman Clark. Thanks, Nancy.
Oh, can I suggest for accuracy, Nancy, can you email your motion to our clerk?
Yes, I can.
And then our clerk will have it, and then later in this meeting, we can move the motion appropriately and pass it. I'd rather have the wording exactly rather than us writing it down shorthand. Does that make sense, councillors? I'm seeing thumbs up. You're okay with that, Nancy?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. So when you finish here, if you could send that email directly to our clerk, and then we can deal with it accordingly.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Nan, did you have any questions? Do you want to spell out your email address?
Sure. Just Nancy, it's Tamara Bates. You have my email address already, but it's tamara.bates@hamilton.ca. If you could send it to me rather than to clerk@hamilton.ca. Just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your delegation today. Councilors, we have no further delegations. I need a mover and a seconder to receive delegations 9.1A and B, 9.2A to D, and 9.3. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson, and the vote will be up shortly. The vote is up, councillors. Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that vote carried 3-0. Councillors, we are now moving on to 10.1, which is the Recreation Master Plan Facility Provision Decision-Making Framework. You can't get these titles any longer, can you? Almost takes up the entire paper. Anyways, if I could have a mover and a seconder simply to put it on the floor, and then we can hear from staff and take questions and debate it. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. And so who wants to introduce where we are?
Good afternoon, Dawn Walton, Manager of Business Support with the Recreation Division. Through you, Mr. Chair. What we're proposing is a framework that we'll be using in order to prioritize our projects that come forward through the Recreation Master Plan. This is an evidence-based framework that will allow us to take all of the projects that we currently have in our identified plan. So part of the purpose of the plan was to bring forward the needs, the provision requirements, the community requirements, and then a review of our existing infrastructure.
Sorry, that was telling Councillor Jackson to stop speaking.
Oh dear.
Go ahead.
So this framework is what we'll use as we move forward. First, to bring forward short, medium, and long-term planning as part of the Recreation Master Plan to be presented in August. But then in broader terms, we'll be using a more refined approach using this framework to get into the details on very site-specific projects to be brought forward as part of our annual capital budgeting process. Yeah, that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to assist.
That was brief.
It's not a big report.
Okay, councillors, do we have any questions? Councillor Jackson, please.
Thanks, Chair Clark. Thank you, Manager Walton. Always good to hear about the status of our recreational master plan and how that'll impact future facilities down the road. So are you coming back next month with longtime consultant Monteith Brown to do a more fulsome presentation of the lay of the land and the inventory through you, Chair Clark, or did I misunderstand that?
On.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is accurate, Councillor Jackson. We will be bringing forward a fulsome presentation. We just wanted committee to be aware of the steps that we're taking through the master plan process. So you'll remember we brought forward guiding principles so you understand the philosophy behind the master plan. This is the evaluation matrix. So again, there's an understanding about how we're bringing forward the recommendations in the plan and how these projects and initiatives have been evaluated as part of that process. So you'll have a lot of time in August to ask more questions, and our representative from Monteith Brown will be with us as well.
That's great. Thank you, Manager Walton. Fair enough. And I'm sure there'll be a good 2 or 3 hour discussion from all my colleagues that may wish to participate at ECS then. I just want to, you've heard me before, Manager Walton, a closing comment and a little bit of forewarning on your Appendix A under factors considered. You've got from A right through to I and L inclusive. D is geographic distribution. Manager Walton, you know how much I advocate for not reducing or, if you will, relocating facilities to potentially meet growth demand. But growth demand's important, of course, but I never want to see a reduction of hubs in our community, which many of our recreational facilities meet the definition of hub. I never want to, if you will, because of a potential change in demographic in a neighborhood, decline of population, I don't necessarily want to sacrifice that area because of a burgeoning area somewhere else in our city. Let's make sure that we're creating win-win scenarios. Just a quick acknowledgement back, please, Manager Walton, so that I know that that's on the radar. Through you, Chair Clark.
Don?
Through the chair, that is accurate, and that is our continued approach to addressing the needs of the community. And as always, all decisions regarding infrastructure that is currently in place, as well as future infrastructure, will come through both a community engagement process and a council review process. So nothing will happen without that broader engagement, and that is all part of our strategy.
Manager Walton, Chair Clark, always has a way of raising my comfort level. Thank you very much, Chair Clark.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nan, do you have any questions?
Thank you. No questions, just appreciation. I'm a fan of these kinds of frameworks, and this one's a simple one for now, but I think that the A through L are robust and really do speak to the gaps and needs and opportunities. So really appreciating the itemized list there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Nan, if you can take the floor.
Certainly, it's
Chair,
yours.
Please. Don, so when I'm looking at A through L, I see the condition and the facility size in item B. So what is going to happen when we get a review back that shows that the facility, for all intents and purposes, is prohibitive to repair? How do we deal with those issues with a facility that has quite literally run out its life cycle and it needs to be replaced, whether on site or on another property? Not to put you on the hot spot, but
Absolutely not.
you do have the title.
Through the chair to the councillor. That's a very good question. And what we'll be doing as next steps will be an implementation strategy that will help us understand how exactly to address those concerns. So we do have infrastructure life cycle renewal backlogs right now, and we have some sites where we're very landlocked and limited with what we can do, and we'll have growing demands specifically in the downtown core if our growth projections are accurate. So as opposed to removing amenities from wards, we'll be looking at strategies to identify where property may exist, that if we have a facility that is no longer viable, but there's still a need, which there always is in a community, looking at opportunities to identify sites for a broader expansion, whether it's a short-term immediate with a phased approach to address future growth strategies, wherever reinvestment in the ward is financially viable to build new and demo old, we'll be looking at all of the factors that go into that. So the costing involved, the distribution of the amenity within the ward, any impacts that it might have onto current and future programming opportunities. So the implementation component of this study is what will address all of those specific requirements and help recreation plan. The immediate pressure is our 10-year plan, but identifying where we may need to look at land acquisition strategies and alternatives for development in some of our landlocked areas. It's not going to be an easy task, but it's one that's long overdue, and I think I'm hoping we'll be supported by council as a viable next step for recreation.
Thank you. Chair Nan, if I can ask one more question. We have a number of projects across the city. I don't know, to be honest, how many there are, but they have been approved and they are going through the process. So I'm assuming that they're sacrosanct, that those processes are going to continue, and this review isn't dealing with those as much as other properties. Is that a fair statement?
Through the chair, that's accurate. So our goal right now is to continue to maintain service at all of the sites we have operational and continue to invest in life cycle renewal in order to serve the public as we always have. What we're really looking at strategically is if we have a facility that has a life cycle renewal within the next 5 or 10 years where I'm going to have system failure on a facility and where we have identified need for growth related projects, what is the best option in that area to get the better facility out of the deal by potentially removing the old asset, building on the same property or rebuilding on the same property, or looking for a site that's within that area to rebuild a new space in order to get the best value for the capital dollars that are being spent and the best facility for the current and future needs of that community. So life cycle renewal is prioritized through the study as something that will require attention regardless, and growth-related projects have also been identified as a need from a planning perspective and a funding perspective. The goal would be to bring items forward to council that would be reflected in a capital budget process and an annual update that would prioritize our projects, identify any funding gaps or pressures that may come through this work, and then present it to council so the decision making is in front of everyone in an informed way to make decisions moving forward.
Thank you for that. And how do we include civic engagement in this process?
So through the chair, not only is civic engagement built into the recommendations of the master plan as not only one of our guiding principles, but also a recommendation that we need to be strategic in engagement as we progress. Our best practice has always been whenever we're building or retrofitting significantly a facility that would have an impact to the public, engagement through that feasibility process is always one of our pillars as we move forward, as well as if we are looking at a facility that is a new opportunity, looking at where the future need is and trying to get ahead of who else might need to be informed in that process. So not just looking at current or immediate users, but trying to be aware and cognizant of who else may be impacted by a build to make sure that we are engaging them. And we're also looking at a bit of a broader outreach with some of the existing committees of council that are in place to present to those committees where appropriate to get that type of engagement as well. It's something that we've identified as a bit of a gap, and making full use of and value of some of those committees I think is very important as we proceed.
Thank you, Chair Nan. I want to say that this recommendation, the decision-making process, I think is going to be very helpful. We've experienced these things in the past where we're trying to tackle these master plans and no one wants to see the loss of their facility. But we're not talking about people losing a facility, we're talking about renewal, which is important, and it's included in this framework. So I want to thank you and your staff for bringing that forward. It is most helpful. And I think it will really help this council make some decisions down the road. So thank you. Chair Nan, I will take the chair back. Thank you for your assistance. Seeing that, we need an electronic vote to approve. The vote's up. And it carried 3-0. We're moving on to item 10.2 now, which is the additional funding for City Housing Hamilton's residential conversion at 263 Main Street East in Ward 3, report number HSC 22028. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Councillor Nan, do you have any questions? Nope.
No questions, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. In terms of our previous discussion, this is to support the conversion of 15 units at an existing City Housing Hamilton building, first place, converting 15 previously vacant commercial space into 15 residential units, if I have that correct. Yeah. That is what this one is. Thank you.
I'm seeing nodding heads, so you're good. Councillor Jackson, any questions? Perfect. So we'll now have the vote, please, on 10.2. And that carried 3-0. We're now moving on to item 10.3 in our agenda, adaptation and transformation of services for people experiencing homelessness, update number 5, HSC 20020E, citywide. Are there any questions on the report? Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, just a moment as I pull up my notes. First off, thanks to staff and to Housing Services, everybody who we've been partnering with over the course of the truly challenging time of the pandemic to ensure that those who've been made most vulnerable during the pandemic had shelter options. We are at this stage of moving from emergency as best we can, although the scenario is still one of that, is my understanding, and moving from the hotel scenario towards a more sustainable approach. Having said that, there are some questions that I have regarding page 4. The chart and the first bullet there speaking to maximizing the capacity at the Good Shepherd Cathedral Temporary Women's Shelter to 100 spaces by September 30th, 2022. So a few questions, if I could, through you, Chair. So this temporary shelter has been extended from the projected closure date on a number of occasions now. From inception, it was very clearly identified that it was not only open during the emergency period of the pandemic, but also consistently communicated that the necessity of this space would be dictated by the need, and that the need was a complex one because it was in response to the pandemic in terms of the need for folks in shelter to be adequately spaced away from each other within the public health guidelines and criteria, but also because of the surge in individuals needing shelter. So if somebody on staff could please confirm if that is still the case and why this temporary shelter is expanding its capacity to 100 and that it remains with its doors open versus the previously projected, although never confirmed, closure date of June 2022.
Thank you. GM Burden, you wish to please introduce yourself.
Through you, Mr. Chair, good afternoon. Nadia Zalisco, Manager of Homelessness Policy and Programs at Housing Services. Councillor Nan, you are exactly right. The intention was to maintain this location as long as needed to allow for flexibility to meet demand during the pandemic, increased demand in particular for women who are experiencing homelessness, who needed access to safe shelter space in the community. We were unable to predict with certainty an end date of that need, nor how that need might evolve during the pandemic. So we've appreciated the flexibility, both through Good Shepherd, certainly residents in the community, and this council to be able to continue to provide that support. The facility itself allows for up to 100 beds, and we want to ensure that we maximize that space if in fact that level of need was required by women in the community. That said, it remains a temporary solution. It is more operationally and economically feasible to operate out of this location rather than hotels for a number of reasons. However, it is an emergency response and it's complemented by other efforts listed in the same section that Councillor Nan has referenced in the report. And that includes looking at permanent solutions for women. So enabling women to leave the shelter system, including Good Shepherd Cathedral, into the new build through the Reaching Home initiative through Good Shepherd, and as well maximizing all of our resources to ensure outflow for women currently accessing emergency supports, including the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, housing allowances, housing stability benefit, etc.
Thank you for that response, Nadia. And if I could, just a few more supplementals. And it's coming in response to community members who live adjacent to the temporary shelter. So I understand very clearly what you said there and why I asked for the public confirmation in terms of our inability to predict when the need comes to an end. Having said that, is there a sense of a timeline for closure for this facility, given the new build that Good Shepherd is bringing online and the transition from a temporary shelter towards that permanent one?
Thank you. Natalie?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We are coming forward with that analysis in the August report. We'll have further details. It's we recognize that this is not a permanent solution, so it is tied to investments and opportunities to increase the permanent emergency shelter capacity for women in the system, as well as permanent housing for women in the system. So those details will come forward in the August report.
Okay,
Councillor.
thank you. Can you confirm, though, that there is no plan afoot by the city in any way to convert this temporary shelter location into a permanent shelter?
That's a fair question. Natalie?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, there is no plan to convert the temporary emergency shelter, open strictly to meet the needs of women needing shelter space during the pandemic to be safe, into a permanent emergency shelter facility.
Thank you, Nadia. And final question, when can the community anticipate another opportunity? And I want to say again, thank you to Housing Services staff and Good Shepherd for joining my office and hosting several now community information sessions on the temporary shelter location. But given the extension forward, when can we anticipate another opportunity to inform the community, to have them be able to ask their questions? And then that's it. And then I have a final operation question on the site as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Natalie?
Through you, Mr. Chair, following discussion and direction from this council in August, based on the decisions made around that site, we would be welcoming of the opportunity to regroup with community members to further answer their questions and address any concerns that they bring forward.
Thank you. And final question would be in terms of there was expressed concern around health and safety of the facility. There was concerns around asbestos, there was concerns around air quality, and several other items that had been raised directly to the city, but also through media. If we could just get a quick update on that, anything that you could provide, I'd appreciate it. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Go ahead, Natalie.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of the concerns that have been raised by some of the women accessing support and advocates and media, the city is satisfied that Good Shepherd is taking steps to ensure clients are comfortable and that there has been an operating heating system when that was needed, temperatures are being monitored, and that there are sufficient resources in place. In terms of concerns around asbestos, there was an audit that had been completed prior to Good Shepherd commencing any shelter operations at this location. Good Shepherd did have the pipes identified in the complaint that was brought forward, looked at, and they were advised that they did not present a risk. Good Shepherd has taken the appropriate steps to address concerns around mice activity, and we are also confident that when it comes to infection prevention and control, that Good Shepherd is following local public health requirements. While this is a dormitory setting with 4 to 6 clients in a room, all clients are screened, and the facility participates in COVID swabbing, rapid testing, and adheres to requirements such as masking. The facility also has designated isolation spaces for those suspected of having COVID-19 and established protocols for positive cases and outbreaks. The facility has undergone a fire inspection, and as part of the transition of this facility in March, since the transition of this facility, as Councillor Ann has noted, we continue to engage with the community to hear and then be prepared to respond to any new and emerging concerns that may arise.
That was a very comprehensive response. Councillor?
Thank you. And should any more issues arise, any recommendation of where those issues can be directed?
Natalie.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, we work very closely with Good Shepherd and are exchanging information back and forth, such that if Good Shepherd was to receive any complaints or indications of concern, we trust that we would be advised and support in addressing them. Likewise, if we're happy at Housing Services to receive any concerns or inquiries directly, and are well connected with Good Shepherd to ensure that they are promptly addressed and resolved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. If you can just take the chair for a second. So
certainly, go ahead.
Get some clarification. The issue for the community is when's this temporary facility going to end being temporary and not transferred into a permanent facility. But do we have a time that we can provide the residents? Because candidly, Councillor Nan, all the councillors are getting emails.
Yep.
So.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I cannot confirm a date at this time. We are working on proposals and options to bring forward to committee in August, so shortly, so that committee can deliberate and advise and make a decision on appropriate length of operation of the temporary location as we transition to more permanent solutions.
Thank you, Chair Nan. GM Burden raised her hand.
Thank you. Through the Angie Burden, General Manager, Healthy and Safe Communities. Through the chair to the councillor. We do have this report, the idea of the shelter and the expanded capacity that we've brought online during COVID is not a level of capacity that we can sustain as the COVID funding has ended. This report, as well as the August report, are coming forward to give council a line of sight to all of the capacity that was expanded during COVID as a result of the emergency response. And the August report will be a very detailed, you have some capacity numbers in the July report, but the August report will be an analysis of the financial implications and the decision points before council around what is that next step beyond the end of the calendar year. And so I just want to say that this is in the context of before the pandemic, the shelter system was a system under pressure, and there was a sense that the demand was exceeding resources and would require investment. And now we've had that exacerbated by COVID. So the need is arguably greater over the last several years. And there is the sense amongst staff that returning to pre-COVID service levels is not necessarily an option that would be ideal. However, weighing that with the needs of our community and the resources that we have will really be the topic of our August report. And the decision points coming forward will be council's direction to staff around recommended service levels and the corresponding investment that would be required, or the other alternative would be to return to pre-COVID service levels. So all of that detail that you see in the July report will be expanded in the August report, and it's part of the reason why Nadia can't answer the question exactly, because we do anticipate that it will be a period of time for us to transition from the system that we have now that is emerging fresh out of COVID. And actually, I had heard that there is a sense that wave 7 is upon us. So we have some of that uncertainty in terms of the pandemic going into the fall. But the idea would be to have an interim set of recommendations as we transition to more of that permanent state for our adapted and transitioned shelter system. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Chair Nan, to be fair, what I'm hearing in fancier language is that our pre-COVID numbers for homeless women was under pressure. We created a temporary situation during COVID with a temporary shelter that is sheltering 100 women. And the challenge that we have is just by going back to pre-COVID numbers or funding, those residents that are in housing shelters now will end up being on the street again. So we just can't wipe it off the map and say, okay, we're going back to pre-COVID numbers and everything will be okay. Because the reality is we have more homeless today than we had pre-COVID. And COVID is irrelevant. How are we going to address the explosion of homelessness that we have seen in this community? And I know that community is very keen to see that temporary shelter close because they've been putting up with a lot. But we have to be honest with ourselves and the broader community. The demands on our system, the demands from homeless people, people who are finding themselves through no fault of their own on the street, is higher than it has ever been in the history of Hamilton. So will your report in August address that side of the equation?
Through the chair, we will be providing options, recommended options for expansion or retention of existing capacity in part, and then also indicating what the cost will be and funding options for some of those recommendations. And we don't anticipate, as Nadia had mentioned, some of the sites, because we have increased capacity, for example, at Cathedral, does not mean that that is the designated location for the permanent shelter spaces.
Exactly. Okay, I look forward to your report, but Chair Nan, I'm concerned because we are now dealing with numbers that we have never seen before in the city of Hamilton. And so how we as a municipality, our residents, our staff, council come together to say this is how we're going to address this issue. Till we have that conversation, I don't think the issue is going to go away, quite frankly. So thank you. I will take the chair back, Councillor Nan. So 10.3 has been, did I get a mover and a seconder? So I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Jackson. And it's just to receive the report. Thank you. The vote is up. And that vote carries. We're now moving on to 11.1 motions. Councillor Marula is not here. Councillor Jackson's going. Councillor Jackson, please, would you like to move your motion, please, on behalf of Councillor Marula?
Chairman Clark, absolutely. I am your standby man always. Moved by myself, seconded by Ward 3 Councillor Narinder Nan. Thank you. Financial support for City Housing Hamilton to remove, replace existing cameras at 44 Martha Street and 799-847 Roxborough Avenue. Under that particular file listed, where City Housing Hamilton owns these properties. A 69-unit multi-residential townhouse complex built in 1968, where City Housing Hamilton endeavors to increase the monitoring of safety and security issues at the complex. Whereas the existing camera system at the property requires a digital video recorder to be in locked cabinets in the basement of individual tenant units. Whereas the placement of these digital video recorders within the tenant units, access may not always be easily available, and whereas the nature of the existing camera system is disruptive to the lives of the tenants when staff obtain camera footage required for safety, security purposes, as units must be entered to obtain camera footage. Whereas City Housing Hamilton has obtained a quote to remove the 5 old cameras and install 5 new ones at this property. The new cameras will be wireless, will be able to stream video to the building attendants unit, where there is currently a digital video recorder unit. Furthermore, the signal will be able to be streamed to a site office at 10 St. Andrews Drive, therefore eliminating disruption to tenants and provide immediate access to the footage. Whereas CHH commits to overseeing the installation work and ongoing maintenance, whereas CHH has no budgeted amount, unfortunately, for the safety and security improvements, and whereas the scope of work requires almost $7,000 plus HST to complete the removal and upgrade of the cameras, therefore, Chair Clark, be it resolved, A, the proposed cost of nearly $7,000 to an upset limit of $7,500 for contingency for the removal and upgraded replacement of the camera system at 44 Martha, 799-847 Roxborough, be funded from Councillor Marula's capital reinvestment account number stated, and B, that the mayor, city clerk be authorized direct to execute any required agreements, ancillary documents with such terms, conditions in a form satisfactory to the city solicitor. Chair Clark, Councillor Marula has worked all this through with City Housing Hamilton property manager and upper management, and I'm here to move this motion on his behalf today. Seconded by Councillor Nan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murillo always does his homework. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments about the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question, please. The vote is up. And that carried 3-0. We're moving on to 11.2, which is funding for Roots to Justice initiative at J.C. Beamer Park. Councillor Nan, please introduce your motion.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Jackson, if I could, please. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened social and economic disparities among equity-seeking groups, and whereas young people have struggled from the negative impacts of the pandemic regarding mental health, isolation, and from inconsistent access to social, cultural, and recreation programs, and whereas the pandemic has exacerbated food insecurity and the cost of food continues to rise, and whereas the Roots to Justice program engages youth and racialized residents to cultivate and care for their community and environment, share knowledge gained through programming with their community to build resilience and community care, while also supporting households in need to be able to access food and other supports they would otherwise be unable to obtain. And whereas this program is in partnership with the Hamilton Centre for Civic Inclusion, will provide hands-on programming directed towards, but not limited to, low-income racialized youth in the Hamilton core to build skills and knowledge around gardening and food security. And whereas Roots to Justice has met with the City of Hamilton staff to develop a plan for the implementation and maintenance of garden boxes at J.C. Beamer Park, therefore be it resolved that $5,000 be allocated from the Ward 3 Bell Tower account, number 3301609603, to the Hamilton Centre for Civic Inclusion as the fiscal sponsor for the implementation of the Roots to Justice initiative at J.C. Beamer Park, and B, that the Mayor and City Clerk be authorized and directed to execute any required agreements and ancillary documents with such terms and conditions in a form that's satisfactory to the City Solicitor. Again, to my colleagues, this is a much needed initiative. And it's actually been quite beautiful to witness the demographic shift of those residents who enjoy J.C. Beamer Park. A lot of recent refugees and diverse communities who are laying claim to this neighborhood being their home. And with the rise of food costs and the lack of ongoing increase to financial supports for those who need it, this kind of initiative is an opportunity to build skills and also address the realities of food security, and do so in a way that fosters community and fosters skill exchange and development, and also share the fruits, literally, and vegetables of the labor. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Jackson, any questions? Okay, ready for the question. Let's go. The vote is up. I just want to say it's out of the park. Yeah, it is. Notices of motion. Oh, this one carried 3-0. Any notices of motion from anyone?
Councillor, before we move on to that, we have Councillor Jackson's motion still waiting for the delegation request for the
support for the alert
program.
For the autistic alert, Amber Alert.
See, I forgot about you already, Councillor.
Yeah, boy, the standby guy fades out real fast, eh? Thanks, Chair Clark. Okay.
That must have been the shirt. I was distracted. Okay, would you like to move the motion, please? And I believe Councillor Nan is seconding it.
Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by the hardworking Ward 3 Councillor, Narinder Nan. And this is on behalf of Nancy, our delegate. Whereas we have all become aware of the recent tragic death of Draven Graham, an 11-year-old child on the autistic spectrum, after walking away from the family home. Whereas the Amber Alert has been very effective in announcing to the public children who have been abducted, and whereas a similar alert program for those who have special needs who leave family custody would be seen to be warranted in the province, therefore be it resolved, and I thank you, Elsie Bates, for your wordsmithing, that the Council of the City of Hamilton request the province to explore the feasibility of developing and implementing a community warning program similar to or part of the Amber Alert for those persons of special needs or circumstances who sadly leave the caregiver or location and sadly may be potentially putting themselves at risk. Seconded by Councillor Nan. Thank you, Chair Clark.
Thank you. We'll have the question called, please. See, without Tamara, I'd be lost. Perfect. Thank you. And that carried 3-0. 13.1 is the amendments to the outstanding business list. May I have a move and a seconder to put the amendments to the OBL on the floor? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Nan. Any questions about the outstanding business list? Seeing none, we'll call the question, please. And that question is up. And that carried 3-0. Thank you very much. Councillors, I'm now looking at private and confidential item number 14.1, appointment to the Seniors Advisory Committee. Do either of you wish to go in camera to address the issue? Seeing not, Councillor Jackson, please read your motion in open session.
Thank you, Chair Clark. Moved by myself and seconded by Ward 3 Councillor Narinder Nan, who both of us were on the selection committee with Chair Pauls, that the recommendation respecting an appointment to the Seniors Advisory Committee be approved and the name be released publicly tomorrow upon approval by City Council. And if so done tomorrow, Chair Clark, the individual long-standing volunteer in our community, I'm sure will be received well. Thank you, Chair Clark.
Thank you. So just to be clear to the public, the name of the individual will remain confidential until council has ratified the decision. We'll have the vote now, please, Madam Clerk. The vote is up. And it carried 3-0. And I believe there's nothing left except adjournment, item 15. Mover and seconder, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Nan, and let's call the question. Councillors, thank you for all of your deliberations today, and to staff. It was, we got a lot through.
Can something be said for the terrific three of us? That's okay. Thank you.
Well, that would be self-congratulatory, but I'm sure you can find a proxy that will do it for you. Oh, GM Burden is offering it up as the proxy. Okay, councillors, have a wonderful evening. God bless.